Hello everyone, I'm the Creeps Cabin. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I remember that winter so clearly, mostly because of how heavy the snow came down around Christmas, but also because of how badly it shook me up inside. It was about 5 years ago, just before I got married. My mom had started dating again after being alone for a long time, and at first I felt happy for her. She met this guy on a dating site. She said he was polite and quiet, and she liked that he wasn't loud or rude like some other men she'd dated before. When she first told me about him, I didn't think much of it. I had met my own wife online too, so I didn't see anything strange about online dating itself. The first time my wife and I met him in person was at my mom's house. It was just a small dinner. My mom cooked her usual baked chicken with rosemary and garlic potatoes. The guy showed up wearing a dark green wool sweater with these old brown slacks that looked like they belonged to someone's grandpa. He didn't talk much. I remember he kept his eyes closed half the time. When he did open them, it was like he only opened them a tiny bit, like he couldn't be bothered to use them fully. The whole dinner he sat there with his mouth closed tight, unless he was chewing. I remember thinking it was like he was asleep with his eyes half open. My wife didn't like him from the start. She's a very warm person, always giving people a chance, so it stuck out to me that she seemed to stiffen around him. Later that night, after we left, she told me there was something off about him. She couldn't say what exactly, just that he felt wrong. I tried to brush it off and said maybe he was just shy, but over the next few visits, I started to notice what she meant. One time, my mom put out some chocolates after dinner. My wife reached for one, and he grabbed the box and said in this really slow voice, "These are good." Then he put one in his mouth, closed his eyes, and made this long moaning sound while it melted. Not a normal sound. It was like he was enjoying it way too much. My wife put her chocolate back on the plate after that. He did stuff like that a lot, little weird moments that made the air feel heavy. Another time, my mom went into the kitchen to make tea, and I watched him sitting there with his eyes closed, breathing through his nose loudly like he was meditating or smelling the room. When he realized I was looking, he opened his eyes a crack and smiled, but it didn't look like a real smile. It was too slow, like he was trying to remember how to move his face. I still didn't think he was dangerous. Just odd. I mean, there are tons of quiet, weird people in the world who never hurt anyone. But then there was that one visit before Christmas. My wife and I were visiting my mom, and she got called into work suddenly for a short shift. She told us to just hang out until she got back. Her boyfriend was already over. We thought he would just sit with us in the living room while we watched TV, or maybe read a book at the table. Instead, he went straight into my mom's bedroom and closed the door. He stayed in there the entire time, for hours, never coming out once. We heard nothing. No music, no TV, no cough, nothing. It was like he turned into a statue behind that door. We even checked the driveway to see if he left without us noticing, but his car was still parked out front. My wife kept giving me looks like she wanted to leave. When my mom finally got back, he came out of the room like nothing happened, smiled at us with his eyes barely open, and sat down at the table. I asked my mom later what he was doing in there, and she said he just liked to lie down and relax. I didn't know what to say to that. About a week before Christmas, my mom started calling me a lot, more than usual. She was upset with him, saying he had been acting cold, ignoring her texts, and when they were together, he seemed lost in his own head. She said he would sit in her kitchen staring at the floor with his eyes closed for an hour at a time. He would only answer with short, yeah, or no when she asked him questions. I didn't know how to help her except to listen. My wife told her she deserved someone who made her feel happy, not scared or unsettled in her own home. She made up her mind to break up with him, and she decided she would do it on Christmas Eve. I don't know why she picked Christmas Eve, but she said it was better to get it done before the holiday, so she wouldn't be pretending around family. We spent the night with her that night, slept in my old room, and got up early on Christmas morning to drive over to my dad's house. My parents split up years ago, but stayed on okay terms. We were only supposed to stay a few hours and then go back to my mom's for dinner, but the snow came in fast and thick that afternoon. Within an hour, the roads were completely covered, and it kept coming down until evening. My dad had a guest room, so we stayed the night there instead of risking the roads. That night at my dad's house was nice. We played cards and watched an old Christmas movie, and my wife kept checking her phone every hour, texting my mom to see if she was okay. My mom didn't reply after 9 p.m., but we figured she went to bed early. She often did that if she worked a morning shift. Still, my wife couldn't shake her bad feeling. She woke up first the next morning and shook me awake, telling me we had to check on my mom on the way home. I was half asleep and grumbled that my mom was probably fine, but she insisted, saying her stomach hurt with worry. So after breakfast, we packed up and started driving back to town. The roads were clear by then, just packed snow on the sides. My mom's street looked normal, no snow at all because her town was south of the worst part of the storm. Her little white Toyota sat in the driveway like usual. I remember feeling a little annoyed as I parked, thinking we were being dramatic for no reason. But my wife's hand was shaking when she reached for the door handle. My mom never locks her door, which drives me crazy. I always tell her that anyone could just walk right in, but she says she likes knowing her friends can come by anytime. That day it felt wrong opening her door without knocking, but we did anyway. The house smelled like coffee and old candles, a smell I grew up with. At first, everything looked normal. Her shoes were by the door, her purse on the table. The TV was off. The place was quiet. Too quiet. My mom usually had the radio on low even when she wasn't home. We stepped into the kitchen, and my wife froze, grabbing my arm so tight it hurt. I followed her gaze and saw this deep red liquid dripping down from the fridge water dispenser. The little tray was overflowing and a dark puddle had spread onto the kitchen tiles. It was so red and thick that for a second my vision blurred, and I thought I was going to pass out. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. My wife started to cry, holding her hand over her mouth. The smell hit me next. Not the smell of blood exactly, but something sweet and rotting mixed together. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the worst moment of my life. I pictured opening the freezer and seeing my mom's head shoved in there, her eyes frozen wide open, her mouth frozen in a scream. I could see her boyfriend doing it. I could see him closing his eyes as he did it, humming to himself like he was enjoying a piece of chocolate melting in his mouth. I don't know how long we stood there. The dripping sound was so soft, but it felt like it echoed through the whole house. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I wanted to run outside, to throw up, to scream, but I couldn't leave if my mom was here somewhere, hurt or dead. I reached out for the freezer handle. My hand was shaking so badly that I had to grab it with both hands to pull it open. My wife backed up against the counter, covering her ears, tears rolling down her face. Inside, there was a half-empty bag of frozen cherries that had tipped over and fallen against the ice dispenser. The cherries had melted completely, leaking their dark juice down through the dispenser, mixing with bits of ice, dripping out like blood. For a long moment, I just stared at the bag. It didn't look real. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. I closed the freezer and leaned against it, feeling my knees nearly give out under me. My wife was still crying, asking me if it was my mom, but I couldn't speak yet. I just shook my head over and over until I managed to say, "It's cherries. Just cherries." We found my mom asleep in her bedroom. She had worked a double shift and hadn't even noticed the mess. When she woke up, she laughed when I told her about the cherries and apologized for scaring us. But my wife and I didn't laugh. My mom didn't know how close we came to thinking she was dead, how real it felt in that kitchen with the red juice dripping and the silent house pressing in on us. I went out later that day and bought her a lock for her door. I didn't care if she didn't want it. I installed it myself that evening. Her boyfriend never came back after Christmas Eve. She said he left quietly when she told him it was over, didn't even say goodbye, just nodded with his eyes closed and walked out. She never heard from him again. Sometimes, even now, when I go to get ice from our own freezer, I think about those melted cherries dripping out of my mom's fridge. I think about how quickly your life can split in two. The moment before you think someone you love is dead, and the moment after you realize they're still alive. And I think about how your heart can carry that fear forever, the fear of what almost was, even when nothing actually happened. It's like carrying the echo of a nightmare, always there in the back of your mind, waiting for the next quiet morning to wake up and remind you just how fragile it all really is. I never thought I'd be the type of person who would feel scared walking in their own neighborhood, but it happened. It was last summer, middle of July, and the evenings were long and hot. I was living alone in a small rental house on the edge of town. My yard backed up to a thin strip of woods, which ended at a farmer's field. It wasn't a thick forest or anything, just enough trees to block the view of the fields and the highway further out. During the day it looked peaceful, birds in the branches, squirrels chasing each other. But at night, when the sun went down and the yard lights went off, it turned into a pitch-black wall of shadows. That evening I'd spent most of my time sitting on my porch, listening to the cicadas buzzing in the trees. I remember I didn't feel like cooking, so I just had leftover pizza cold out of the fridge. Around 9:30 p.m., the air felt cooler, so I decided to take a walk down the street. My neighborhood was made up of old houses, some kept up nicely, some looking like no one had lived in them for years. The streetlights were spread out far, leaving long stretches of darkness between them. I put on my shoes, left the porch light on, and walked down the gravel driveway onto the road. As I walked, I noticed no other houses had their lights on. Most people around here went to bed early. The gravel crunched under my shoes. Crickets chirped in the ditches. I felt calm at first, just enjoying the breeze after a hot day. I walked to the end of the street where it curved around an empty lot. There was a broken fence there, with knee-high weeds growing through the gaps. I stood for a moment looking out past the fence, where the lot opened up to another cluster of trees before meeting the highway. A semi roared by in the distance, its headlights flashing between the trunks before disappearing. I turned back and headed home. That's when I started feeling it, like something was different. The air felt heavy in my chest. The bugs had stopped making noise. I walked slower, listening, but all I could hear was my own breathing. I told myself I was being dramatic, that it was just a quiet night. But as I got closer to my house, I started to feel like someone was behind me. I didn't hear footsteps, but I felt watched, like something just outside my vision was following each step I took. I quickened my pace until I reached my driveway. I turned in, eyes scanning the woods behind my house. The porch light glowed softly, lighting up the gravel and the lower branches of the trees, but everything past that was black. I walked up the steps, feeling my hands shake slightly as I pulled the screen door open. I stepped inside, locked the deadbolt, and leaned against the door listening. Nothing. I let out a long breath, almost laughing at myself. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV. For a while I forgot about it, zoning out to some boring late-night show. Around 11 p.m., I decided to head to bed. I turned off the lights, checked the locks again out of habit, and walked down the short hallway to my room. I left the window cracked open because the house was stuffy. My bed was right under the window. I lay there, listening to the quiet hum of bugs outside, trying to keep my mind blank so I could sleep. That feeling came back, like I wasn't alone. I lay still, staring at the dark ceiling, hearing the cicadas outside. Then I heard it. It sounded like breathing. At first, I thought it was my own, but then I realized it was coming from outside the window. I froze. The breathing was slow and steady, like someone trying to keep quiet. I didn't move a muscle. I listened hard, ears straining, heart hammering against my ribs. I thought maybe it was an animal, a raccoon or a stray dog, but the breathing sounded human. I could hear the air sucking in through a nose, then blowing out softly. It was right on the other side of the screen. I don't know how long I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, too afraid to even turn my head towards the window. It felt like forever. My mouth was dry, and my arms felt numb from staying still. The breathing kept going. In, out, slow, quiet. Then it stopped. I waited, counting the seconds in my head, not daring to move. The bugs outside had gone silent again. The whole night felt heavy and dead. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, careful steps moving along the side of the house towards the back door. The gravel crunched under each step. I sat up quickly, my hand grabbing the baseball bat I kept next to the bed. I stood there, knees shaking so hard I thought I might fall. The steps stopped by the back door. I heard the quiet rattle of the handle. Then nothing. I waited in the dark, listening to my own breathing. I tried to calm down enough to think clearly. I reached over and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. My hands were trembling so bad I almost dropped it. I turned it on, but I didn't call anyone. I just held it, screen glowing dim blue in the dark room, as if that little light would keep me safe. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I didn't sleep at all. I stood by the window, looking out through the mesh screen into the dark yard, but saw nothing. Finally, around 5 a.m., when the sky started turning pale blue, I walked around the house, checking every door and window. Everything was still locked. I walked onto the porch and looked out at the woods. The trees stood silent and empty in the morning light. Birds started singing again. It felt so normal, so calm. I almost thought I'd imagined it. That day I tried to go about things as usual. Made coffee, took a shower, sat on the porch for a while. But I kept looking at the edge of the woods, wondering if someone was out there watching. When evening came again, I didn't go for a walk. I sat inside, watching the window as the sun went down. When it was completely dark, I turned on every light in the house. I sat there all night, baseball bat in my hands, listening. But nothing happened. For a few days, I tried to shake it off. I went to work, came home, stayed inside. One night, after a long day at work, I was feeling more relaxed. I ate dinner, took a shower, and decided I'd sit on the porch for a bit to get some fresh air before bed. It was around 10 p.m. The night was quiet, just the sound of crickets and a dog barking faintly far away. I sat there in the dark, sipping on a glass of water, staring at the tree line. That's when I saw it. Just a flicker of movement between the trees. My eyes locked onto the spot. At first I thought it was an animal, but then I realized it was too tall. I saw the outline of a person standing there, half hidden behind a trunk, just far enough that I couldn't see their face. They weren't moving, just standing and watching. My whole body turned cold. I stood up slowly, my knees weak. I backed up towards the door, never taking my eyes off the spot where they stood. The figure didn't move. I reached behind me, feeling for the doorknob, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I finally got the door open and stepped inside, slamming it shut and locking it. I stood there, staring out through the glass window in the door, but I couldn't see them anymore. The trees were still and silent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, lights on, clutching the bat to my chest. The next morning, I called the landlord and told him I needed to break my lease. I didn't tell him why. I packed up my stuff that day, shoving clothes into bags, not caring how messy it was. I left before the sun went down. I drove straight to my brother's place 2 towns over. I never went back to that house. A few weeks later, when I went back with my brother to grab the last few boxes, the new tenant was already there. I didn't tell them what happened. I just grabbed my things and left. Now, even in my new place, I keep all the windows locked. I check the locks 3 times before bed. Sometimes, when I lay down at night, I hear breathing outside my window. I tell myself it's just the wind, but deep down I know what it sounds like. Slow, quiet, human. I never open the window at night anymore. I never walk alone in the dark, because I know he's still out there. And I know he remembers me just like I remember him, standing in the shadows, watching me breathe in my own home, knowing I could never see his face. I always knew the house next door was abandoned. It was a small 2-story place with faded yellow paint peeling off in long strips, windows coated with dirt and dead bugs, gutters hanging off at the corners. When I moved in, people told me no one had lived there for at least 25 years. The story was that the owner left for California and just never came back. He didn't sell it, didn't rent it out. It just sat there, sinking further into the ground every rainy season, leaning to one side like it was tired. I used to stand at my kitchen window at night and stare out at it while eating dinner. The outside light above its front door still worked, which was weird since no one paid the electric bill. Maybe it was tied into mine somehow, or maybe it was a separate line that stayed alive all these years. But the glow of that one orange bulb, flickering and attracting moths and mosquitoes, made the place even creepier. One Saturday evening in late October, I decided I was finally going to check it out. I don't really know why. Maybe because I had nothing to do. Maybe because I kept thinking about it every night while watching TV, picturing what was inside. I grabbed my black work gloves from the garage, a strong LED flashlight, and a small crowbar just in case any doors were stuck shut. I walked over at around 8 p.m. when it was fully dark, stepping carefully so none of my neighbors saw me. I knew they'd call the cops if they saw someone breaking in, even though no one lived there. I tried the back door first. It was locked. The handle turned a little, but didn't budge. I walked around the side, tripping a little on a broken paving stone hidden by dead weeds. I got to a small window that led into the basement. It was grimy as hell, covered in webs and dead flies, but when I pushed on it with my gloved hand, it gave way and slid open with a crackling squeak. Cold, damp air came out, smelling like mold and rust. I pulled myself up, sticking my flashlight through first, and dropped down into the basement. The floor was concrete, covered in old newspapers that had half melted into the ground from water leaks. The air was freezing. My breath came out in small puffs. I shone my flashlight around, slowly moving it from one side to the other. Against the far wall was a grand piano, the top of it covered in dust so thick it looked like snow. I walked over to it, my boots crunching on broken glass and dirt. I pressed one key and it gave out a sad, warbling note, completely out of tune. The strings vibrated for a while, echoing through the empty basement. It felt like it was announcing that I was there. Next to the piano was a pile of green canvas bags. I kicked one open with my boot and saw old WW2 helmets, a rusted canteen, folded uniforms with patches eaten away by moths. There were medals still attached to one shirt, though I couldn't see what they were for under all the dirt. It felt wrong, seeing all that left to rot in the basement, like leaving someone's life story to be chewed up by rats. On the wall behind the piano, someone had hung posters decades ago. The colors were faded almost to gray, but I could still make out what one of them was. Elvis, smiling wide, with a bright blue background. I moved closer and saw writing near the bottom. A signature. It was real. A real signed Elvis poster just sitting in this basement. I couldn't believe it. The paper was curling off the wall in wet layers, the ink smudged but still readable. I kept walking around, finding more instruments leaning against the walls. A trumpet with dented valves, a saxophone covered in green tarnish, a violin missing 2 strings. On top of a crate was a broken wedding picture frame. The glass was shattered, the photo yellowed and curling at the edges. It was a man and woman smiling at each other in front of a church. Their faces were still clear despite the rot. I stared at them for a long time, wondering why he left it behind. Why he left all of this behind. I climbed the old wooden steps to the main floor. The railing was loose and rattled when I touched it. My flashlight beam moved over the kitchen first. The fridge door was half open. I walked over and pulled it open wider. Inside was a brick of something that used to be meat, covered in green and black mold, fuzzy like moss growing on rocks. There were cans of beer on the door shelf. I picked one up and shook it. Solid. Frozen solid from decades of sitting there. On the stovetop was a rusted pan with a grayish lump inside. I couldn't tell what it used to be. Pasta maybe, or some meat dish. The smell was sour, stale, like old garbage. The sink was full of dishes. Bowls, forks, spoons, some stained coffee mugs. The water had long since evaporated, leaving rings of crusty residue. I stepped around to the living room. There was an unmade bed pushed against the wall under the window. The sheets were still on it, twisted and yellow with age. On the nightstand next to the bed was a clock radio with red LED numbers that no longer lit up. An ashtray sat beside it, filled with cigarette, but so old they had collapsed into themselves like little burnt bones. I walked back into the hallway. The lights were still on. Not all of them, just a few. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the hall near the stairs going up. It was the kind of dim yellow light that made everything look sick. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring up into the darkness above. The banister was covered in thick dust. Spider webs hung from the ceiling corners, some with dead flies and moths trapped in them. I started to walk up, shining my flashlight ahead of me. Each step creaked loudly under my weight, like it was announcing my presence to anyone or anything upstairs. When I reached the landing, there was a long hallway with 3 rooms on either side. The doors were closed except for one on the right, which was half open. The smell up there was stronger. Old urine mold rot. As I took a step forward, I heard it. A faint sound coming from the room on the left at the end of the hall. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through a broken window. I stood still, holding my breath to hear better. That's when I realized it wasn't the wind. It was crying. Quiet, muffled crying. It sounded like a woman, or maybe a young girl. My throat closed up instantly. The hair on my arms stood straight up. I felt cold sweat forming on my back under my jacket. I turned and ran. I didn't even look inside the rooms as I passed. I just ran down the stairs, almost slipping on the last step. I sprinted through the kitchen, down the basement steps 2 at a time, and grabbed the window frame to pull myself up and out. My foot slipped once on the concrete, banging my knee hard against the floor. I bit down a scream and shoved myself out the window, falling onto the grass outside. I lay there for a few seconds, staring up at the night sky, breathing so hard my chest hurt. My knee throbbed, and when I rolled over to stand up, I could feel blood running down my shin under my jeans. I limped back to my house without looking back once. I slammed my back door shut, locked it, and sat down at the kitchen table with my head in my hands. My gloves were dirty with dust and old spiderwebs, and I ripped them off and threw them on the floor. I never went back after that night. For weeks, I kept thinking about what I heard. It wasn't possible for anyone to be up there. No one lived there. No one had been there for decades. But I know what I heard. I didn't imagine it. Sometimes, when I lie in bed at night with the window open, I think I hear faint crying coming through the darkness. It's probably just cats or raccoons fighting in the alley, but part of me knows exactly what it sounds like. Months later, I saw city workers going in and out of the house. They wore hazmat suits and carried out boxes sealed in plastic wrap. I asked one of them what they were doing, and he told me they were clearing out everything before the house got demolished. I didn't ask what they found upstairs. I didn't want to know. Now there's just an empty lot next door, full of weeds and broken glass and old bricks stacked in piles. Sometimes at night, I look out the window and imagine the house still there, lights on, shadows moving behind the curtains. But I tell myself it's gone for good. There's nothing there anymore. Nothing at all. I try to believe that. I really do. I always thought our old house in Pasadena was beautiful. It was built in the 1930s with a wide porch out front and a garden lined with rose bushes that the previous owner clearly loved. The wood beams under the porch ceiling were dark from decades of sun, and the front steps had a slight curve worn into them from so many feet stepping up. When we moved in, it felt like stepping back into a quiet time. My wife fell in love with the place the second she saw it. She said it reminded her of her childhood home in Oregon, especially the smell of old wood and dust when the afternoon sun warmed the floors. Back then, our son was about 3. The years had gone by fast since her mother passed away. That was one of the hardest things my wife ever went through. Her mom was her best friend, the kind of woman who could walk into a store and come out with 5 new friends. She joked about everything, laughed at the dumbest movies, and always called my wife by her childhood nickname. Nobody else ever called her that, just her mom. After she passed, we never used that name. It was like an unspoken rule, something too sacred to repeat casually. My wife missed her mom every day. Sometimes she'd stand by the sink and just stare out the kitchen window, tears sliding down her cheek before she even realized she was crying. That night started like any other. I'd just finished work and was giving our son his bath before dinner. The bathroom in that house was small and old. White hexagon tiles, original to the house, were cracked in places with gray grout darkened over decades. The clawfoot tub creaked when you shifted your weight against it. I'd kneel on the bath mat and let him play with his plastic boats and dinosaurs while I washed his hair. The old ceiling light flickered sometimes when the wind blew outside, like the wiring was a bit loose. I always meant to fix it. He was splashing around, making his little green dinosaur roar and stomp over the soap dish when he paused and looked past my shoulder. Not like kids usually do when they stare off into space. He was focused on something. I felt a small chill run across my back. I turned but saw nothing, just the towel rack and the pale green wall tiles. I asked him if he was okay, but he didn't answer right away. He just kept looking. Then, in his soft voice, he asked me why Grandma calls Mommy a funny name. For a moment, I didn't even register what he meant. I thought he was talking about my mom, who visited sometimes. I asked him what name he meant. He kept staring behind me, water dripping off his chin, and he said Grandma calls Mommy that name, the nickname only my wife's mom ever used. I froze. My hands were still in the bath water. I looked at him and asked where he heard that. He blinked and turned his eyes to me with the blank honesty kids have and said, "The farmer told me." I didn't say anything. I just kept washing him, but my mind was racing. The farmer? Who the hell was the farmer? We lived in Pasadena. There weren't any farmers around here. When he finished his bath, I wrapped him in his towel and carried him to his room. That night I told my wife what he said, and she started crying. She just sat there on the couch, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her old hoodie, and whispered, "There's no way he could know that." We sat there for a long time, the TV flickering in front of us, both of us thinking about her mom and wondering if somehow she was watching over us. The next weekend, it was just me and him at home. My wife worked Saturdays at the local department store. I spent the morning cleaning the kitchen while he played in his room. The sun came through the windows in thin, bright lines that cut across the dusty wood floor. I remember how quiet the house felt that day. Around noon, I heard him in his room talking. Not just the normal babbling kids do with their toys, but like an actual conversation. Short sentences, pauses, laughter. I dried my hands on the dish towel and walked to his doorway. He was sitting on the carpet, trucks spread out around him, talking softly. He didn't notice me right away. I asked what he was doing. He said, without looking up, playing. I asked with who. That's when he finally looked up at me and said, the farmer. Something about the way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. I asked where the farmer was, and he said, he left when you came in. I felt a tight knot form in my chest. I didn't want to scare him, so I just nodded and told him to come out for lunch. That afternoon, he played quietly in the living room while I watched TV. But my mind kept going back to what he said. That night when my wife got home, I told her. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing the tiredness out of her eyes, then whispered that it was creeping her out. Neither of us slept well that night. The old house made noises, creaks and pops in the walls as the air cooled. Every shadow seemed a little darker than usual. A few nights later, we woke up to hear him talking again. It was around 2 in the morning. His little voice carried down the hallway. We lay there, listening. Then we heard him say, "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore." My wife turned to look at me, her eyes wide and scared. We both got out of bed and walked to his room. He was sitting up, his small blanket pulled around his waist. The moonlight through the window lit up his hair in a silver glow. I asked if he was okay. He said, "Yeah, Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." That was it. After that night, he never mentioned the farmer again. Ever. He grew up like any normal kid. He's 13 now, all into video games and basketball, with no memory of any of it. But we remember. We remember every word. Sometimes, years later, I'd think about it when mowing the lawn out back, or painting the trim around the windows. I'd think about who the farmer was. Was it just an imaginary friend his young mind created? Maybe. Kids do that all the time. Or maybe it was something deeper. Maybe it was just a memory glitch, something he overheard once from my wife without us realizing. That's what I tell myself when I think about it too much. I think about his little face when he told me Grandma said they couldn't be friends anymore. I think about my wife sitting on the couch, holding her mug of tea, staring off into space, and remembering her mom. I think about all the empty spaces in old houses where sounds echo and shadows gather. I think about how children see the world with clear eyes, unclouded by fear or reason. And I think about the silence after that night, how he never once said the name the farmer again. In the end, life just kept moving. We repainted the living room from faded beige to pale gray. We replaced the old ceiling light in the bathroom, so it didn't flicker anymore. We changed the cracked tiles one by one. We lived in that house for another 6 years before moving to a newer place closer to my work. The day we left, as I walked through each empty room, making sure nothing was left behind, I felt something heavy in my chest when I got to his old room. The carpet was still soft under my feet. The windows still rattled slightly when trucks went by. I stood there for a while, looking at the place where he once sat talking to the farmer, remembering that time in our lives when the world felt so big and unexplained. Outside, my wife was packing the last box into the back of the SUV. Our son, now almost as tall as her, stood with his hands in his pockets, staring down the street with that same faraway look she used to have. I closed the door to that room, hearing the latch click for the last time. I walked down the hall and out into the warm California morning, ready to leave the old house behind, but carrying the memory with me, knowing some questions in life never really have answers. I was sitting in my living room that night, the TV screen glowing in front of me with the volume turned down low. I never liked having the volume up too high when I was home alone. It always made me feel more exposed somehow, like someone could hear exactly what I was doing inside. The rest of the house was dark, except for a dim kitchen light in the far corner and the faint blue of the TV. I had a thin blanket draped over my legs and was sitting sideways with my knees up, resting against the arm of the couch. I wasn't really paying attention to what I was watching. It was just background noise to keep the silence from feeling too heavy. Every now and then I'd check my phone, scrolling through the same apps over and over, just waiting for time to pass until I felt tired enough to go to sleep. It was sometime past 10 when I heard the doorbell. It wasn't loud, just a short ding-dong sound echoing down the hallway from the front door. My body tensed up right away. I didn't move at first. I just sat there, staring at the TV but not actually seeing it, listening to the quiet of the house. Sometimes I think I imagine noises when I'm home alone at night, but this wasn't one of those times. The doorbell had definitely rung. I reached for the TV remote and muted it completely, the silence suddenly feeling heavier than before. I sat there for a while, not moving, just listening. My ears felt like they were straining against the silence, trying to hear if someone was walking outside, or if maybe the doorbell had been a mistake. After about 30 seconds, I slowly pulled the blanket off and set it down on the couch. My feet felt cold against the tile floor as I stood up. I moved as quietly as I could, walking around the corner and into the hallway that led to the front door. I didn't turn on any lights. I never did when someone rang the doorbell at night, especially if I was alone. I always thought if someone was outside and they saw a light turn on, they'd know for sure someone was home. If they didn't see a light, maybe they'd think no one was there and just go away. I approached the front door, stepping lightly on the floor so it wouldn't creak. I stopped about 2 feet away from it, listening again. Nothing, just silence. I took a small breath and leaned forward to look through the peephole. Outside, it was dark. The small porch light wasn't on, and the street light was a bit far from my house, leaving the doorway in shadow. At first, I couldn't see anything. It just looked like a black blur, maybe the outline of the bush near the steps, or the edge of the porch railing. I squinted and adjusted my eye against the peephole. That's when I saw it. There was something there. It wasn't a clear figure, like a person standing with shoulders and a head. It looked small, maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. Its shape wasn't exact. It looked more like a black blob against the darkness, but it was moving. The way it moved didn't make sense to me. It was dipping down slightly, and then raising up, almost like it was dancing. Its arms, or what looked like arms, moved outward in a smooth, slow motion, like wings opening gracefully. Then they would come back in, and it would dip down again. I just stared. My heart was beating fast, and I felt this sick feeling in my stomach, like the kind you get when you're about to throw up, but worse. The figure didn't make any noise. It didn't knock or speak or move around quickly. It just stood there, doing that slow, dipping dance, its arms stretching out and in again and again. I don't know how long I stood there, my eye pressed against the peephole, holding my breath so hard my chest started to burn. I felt frozen. Something about it felt so wrong. Even though it wasn't banging on the door or trying to break in, it felt worse because it was just there, moving in that slow way, like it didn't care that someone might be watching it. Eventually, I couldn't look at it anymore. My eyes were starting to tear up, and I felt like if I kept looking at it, something bad would happen. I stepped back from the door and just stood in the dark hallway, shaking. My hands were cold, and I could feel sweat on my back. I wanted to go back to the living room, but I couldn't move. I didn't know if it was still there, or if it was going to ring the doorbell again, or try the handle. I stood there for what felt like minutes, but I have no idea how long it actually was. Finally, I forced myself to look again. I moved back to the door and leaned in slowly, my eye lining up with the peephole. I could feel my pulse in my neck. When I looked through, it was gone. There was nothing there. Just the porch steps, the faint glow of the streetlight in the distance, and the bush swaying slightly in the breeze. I stared out for a while, waiting to see if it would come back. Nothing moved. No shadows. No black shape. Just darkness and quiet. I backed away from the door and stood there, staring at the wood, listening. Part of me thought maybe it had gone around to the back of the house. I wanted to check all the windows, but at the same time, I didn't want to move from where I was standing. I felt like if I walked away from the door, something would come back and knock loudly or try to open it. Eventually, I forced myself to walk back to the living room. I turned off the TV completely and sat down on the couch with my legs pulled up against my chest. I didn't turn any lights on. I just sat there, listening to the silence, feeling every tiny noise in the house vibrate through me. The hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the sound of my own breathing. I stayed like that until I saw the first hint of dawn outside the window. When the sun started to rise and the light filled the house, I finally felt like I could move again. I got up and checked every window and every door, making sure everything was locked. I opened the front door just a crack and peeked outside. There was nothing there. No footprints on the concrete steps. though I wasn't sure if I would have even seen any if it had been a person. I stepped out onto the porch and looked around. The street was empty. The yards were empty. The only sounds were the morning birds and a few distant cars. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. I thought about it almost every night for weeks after. Every time I heard a noise outside, my stomach would twist up in fear, thinking maybe it had come back. Even now, when I think about it, my chest tightens. I still don't know what it was. I've tried to come up with explanations. Maybe it was a kid messing around, but the way it moved didn't feel like a prank. It felt like it didn't even know or care that someone might be watching. After that night, I started turning on the porch light every evening before it got dark. I kept the curtains closed all the time and made sure every door was locked, even if I was home during the day. A few months later, I bought a small security camera and installed it near the front door. I never caught anything unusual on it, but it made me feel a little bit better. Just knowing that if something like that ever came back, at least I wouldn't have to rely on my own eyes alone to prove it was real. But deep down, I know that if it ever does come back, I still wouldn't want to look at it. I wouldn't want to see it moving like that again, dipping and spreading its arms so slowly in the dark. Because whatever it wasn't right. It wasn't normal. And even though I never saw it again, I know that if it wanted to come back, there's nothing I could do to stop it. That night taught me something. Sometimes the scariest things aren't loud or violent or fast. Sometimes they're silent. Sometimes they just stand there, moving in a way that makes no sense, existing in your world when they shouldn't. And that quiet, watching feeling is what keeps me awake at night more than anything else ever has. I was 4 or 5 years old when it happened. My parents had just separated, and my mom was living alone with me in a small 2-bedroom apartment. It wasn't a big place, just a regular old apartment on the first floor with windows that faced out to a patch of grass and bushes before you reached the parking lot. The rooms were simple, with cream-colored walls, old wooden doors with paint peeling off at the edges, and thin carpets that smelled faintly of dust even after vacuuming. My mom had set up my room with colorful bedsheets and toys, but I hardly ever used it. I always ended up in her bed by midnight, curling against her, because I didn't like sleeping alone in a new place without my dad around. That night it was hot. The air felt heavy and warm, even though it was the middle of the night. My mom had the window behind her bed open, but the screen was still in place so mosquitoes wouldn't come in. I remember the smell of the summer air mixed with the faint scent of my mom's shampoo. It felt calm. We had a small standing fan by the dresser, pushing warm air around the room in quiet circles. The sheets felt damp with sweat, sticking to my legs. I couldn't sleep well because of the heat. I kept waking up, rolling over, falling asleep, then waking up again. I remember sitting up at some point, the room lit only by the yellow glow of a streetlight outside filtering through the curtains. Our cat, a small gray and white tabby, was usually curled up at the foot of the bed near my feet. But when I sat up, he wasn't there. Instead, I saw him standing in the doorway of my mom's bedroom. The door was open, and from that spot, I could see past him into my room across the hall. He was staring into my room, ears forward, his tail low. Then he took a few steps into my bedroom and meowed. It was a small, soft sound, but in the silent room it felt loud. I didn't think much of it at first, because he sometimes wandered around at night. But something about the way he meowed made my chest feel tight. It wasn't his usual meow, like when he wanted food or attention. It sounded almost worried. I turned to my mom, still half asleep, and shook her arm to wake her up. She was laying on her side, her arm tucked under her head. It took only a few seconds for her eyes to open, but in those seconds my heart started beating hard. I felt scared, but I didn't know why yet. When she opened her eyes and looked at me, her face went from tired to alert in a split second because she could see the worry in my eyes. I turned back to the doorway, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing in the doorway, right where our cat had been. At first my brain didn't process it. I thought maybe it was my dad coming in, even though I knew he didn't live with us anymore. But it wasn't him. The man was tall, wearing dark clothes that looked almost black in the dim light. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the outline of his body as he stepped slowly away from my room and into the hallway, like he was trying not to make any noise. My mouth felt dry. My chest felt like it was squeezing itself shut from the inside. I couldn't move. My mom's body tensed. I didn't see her face, but I felt her grip tighten around my wrist like a vice. In one quick movement, she sat up, grabbed me by my waist, and turned towards the window behind the bed. I didn't know what was happening. My mind couldn't keep up. The next thing I knew, the screen popped out, and my mom was pushing me through the window. I felt the night air rush against my sweaty face, and then I hit the grass outside. It wasn't a long fall, maybe 3 feet, but the shock of landing knocked the breath out of me for a second. I turned around just in time to see my mom climb out after me, pushing the screen aside with her foot. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed my arm and pulled me up to stand. I could feel the tremble in her grip. She didn't say anything. She just grabbed my hand and started running. The grass was damp with dew, soaking my socks as we ran. The bushes scraped against my legs. The whole world felt silent and loud at the same time. My ears were ringing with my own heartbeat. We ran across the grass and into the parking lot. The pavement felt rough and cold under my feet. I remember seeing a car parked a few spots away, its windows fogged up from the night air. The smell of hot asphalt mixed with gasoline filled my nose. My mom started screaming, this loud, panicked scream that didn't even sound like her. Lights started turning on in other apartments around us. One by one, people looking out through blinds or opening their doors. I just stood there, feeling so small and scared, my mom's hand gripping mine so hard it hurt. I don't know who called the police, but they came quickly. Red and blue lights flashed against the buildings and cars, making the shadows jump around. 2 officers came over to us, their badges shining under the parking lot lights. My mom was crying and shaking, her hair sticking to her wet face. I just stood there staring at the apartment door, waiting to see if the man would come out after us. The police went in to check. I remember sitting on the curb, feeling the cold concrete against my legs, and staring at my bare feet. There were little pieces of gravel stuck to my skin. My mom sat beside me, her arm wrapped tight around my shoulders. The police walked out after what felt like forever and told us there were no signs of forced entry. They said the front door was unlocked. My mom kept saying over and over that she locked it. She was sure she locked it, with the deadbolt and the chain, but they told her maybe she forgot. She never forgot. She always double-checked before bed. She was like that even before we moved to that apartment. She was careful, always careful. That night we didn't go back in until the police said it was okay. Even then, my mom kept looking over her shoulder as we walked back inside. The apartment felt different. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt invaded. I didn't sleep in my room again after that, not even to play during the day. My toys sat untouched on the shelves, gathering dust. My mom moved a dresser in front of the front door every night after that. She also bought a piece of wood and wedged it into the sliding window so it couldn't be opened from the outside. I started noticing that she kept the hallway light on at night after that too. She said it was for me, so I wouldn't be scared, but I think it was for her. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen. I was sitting on the floor with some crayons, drawing pictures on scrap paper, when I heard her open the small closet next to the stove. It was a narrow door with chipped paint. Behind it was the water heater, pipes running up the wall, and a bit of empty space to store cleaning supplies. She pulled out the broom and mopped to sweep when I heard her suck in a sharp breath. I turned around and saw her staring at something on the ground. She bent down and picked up a small notebook. It was old and dirty, the cover bent at the corners. She opened it, and I saw pages filled with scribbles, like drawings and words, but I couldn't see what they said from where I was sitting. She also pulled out a pair of gloves and some old gum wrappers. Her face looked pale, almost gray under the kitchen light. She called the police again. They came and took the notebook and gloves. I remember one of the officers flipping through it slowly, his eyebrows pulling together. Later, my mom told me they thought the man had been hiding in our apartment, maybe in that closet, waiting until we were asleep. They didn't know for sure. They couldn't prove anything. They said there were no fingerprints other than hers on the closet door. But that didn't mean he hadn't been there. It just meant he was careful. The thought of him sitting in that dark little closet while I was watching cartoons in the living room, or while my mom cooked dinner, made my stomach twist. I kept thinking about him breathing quietly, listening to us laugh and talk, just waiting for the right moment to come out. After that, my mom didn't want to stay there anymore. She started looking for a different apartment, somewhere with better locks and no sliding windows at ground level. A month later, we moved to a place on the second floor with bars on the windows. My room there was smaller, just enough for a bed and a small dresser, but I didn't care. I never spent time in it anyway. I always slept in her bed, even as I got older. That night stayed with me. Even now as an adult, I still sleep with my bedroom door locked. I keep my windows shut tight no matter how hot it gets in summer. I check every closet before bed, even though I know it's silly. Sometimes late at night, I think about that man. I think about how he got in, what he was planning to do, why he was in my room, what he thought about while he was hiding in that closet. I think about what might have happened if I hadn't woken up, if my mom hadn't thrown me out that window, if he had been faster than her. I think about how small and quiet my cat looked when he walked into my bedroom that night, and how he was the only reason I woke up at all. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't woken up to see him. I don't like to think about it for too long. All I know is that after that night, nothing ever felt completely safe again, no matter where we lived. And even now, I still find myself waking up in the dark, listening for quiet footsteps in the hallway, just in case. I moved to my dad's when I was 10. Everything felt different there. The streets, the air, even the smell of the rain felt different than my mom's old neighborhood. My dad lived in a small town with cracked sidewalks, roads lined with dried leaves and overgrown weeds pushing up through the concrete. The houses were old, paint peeling from the sides, rust clinging to metal gates, yards littered with forgotten toys and rusted bikes. I didn't know anyone at first, and I spent most of my days after school sitting on the back steps of the house, just watching cars go by, wondering what my friends back home were doing. But my dad was friends with the family nearby. It was a single mom with 3 kids. I remember the first day I went over there with my dad. Their house felt warm. The smell of something cooking on the stove, cartoons playing quietly in the background, shoes scattered near the door, backpacks thrown against the wall. It was loud, busy, but it felt like a place where nothing bad could happen. There was a girl there, older than me by 2 years. She was 12 when I met her. She had long brown hair tied in a low ponytail, freckles scattered across her nose, and these tired-looking eyes that somehow still managed to be friendly. We weren't close, but over the next couple years, I saw her often enough. Birthday parties, barbecues, random evenings when my dad would go over to fix something for their mom. We never really hung out alone, but we ended up having the same friends. She'd sit near me when we were outside with the others, and we'd talk about school or TV shows or music, simple things. Time passed like that. Quiet, normal, boring. Until that winter when everything changed. I was 12 then, almost 13, and it was the year everything felt like it went from childhood to something else, something I didn't have words for back then. That night, it was cold. I remember because my dad was cursing at the heater in the living room. I was in my room, wrapped in blankets, playing on my phone until I fell asleep. I didn't know anything was happening down the road, just a few blocks away, where my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. Their mom was at work, a late shift. She worked in healthcare, something to do with helping people with mental disabilities or the elderly. I never really knew exactly what, but she helped people. That's who she was. Always working late, always tired, always making sure her kids had food on the table, even if she was barely standing up straight. That winter she had been helping this woman from work. She got to know her pretty well, always talked about how sad her situation was, how her family was struggling, how she had a sister who'd been in a mental institution for a long time. The kids knew about her. They heard their mom talking on the phone or venting to friends in the kitchen. The sister had been in and out of institutions for years, but that year she had been released. I guess no one thought much of it. People get released from those places all the time, right? I don't think anyone ever imagined it would matter to them. While their mom was at work that night, Rob was there hanging out. He wasn't supposed to be there, but you know how kids are. Their mom wasn't strict, but didn't like boys in the house when she wasn't home. Rob was a skinny kid, shaggy hair, always wearing hoodies too big for him. He was funny though, always making everyone laugh. That night, they were just hanging out in the living room, watching TV, probably eating snacks they weren't supposed to touch until dinner. Her younger brother was there too, playing with his toys on the floor, half listening to the movie they were watching. Then there was a knock on the door. I found out later she thought it was her mom. Her mom always knocked a certain way before coming in, so she didn't even think twice. She got up and answered the door. Rob told everyone later that when she opened it and he saw it wasn't her mom, his first thought was he needed to get out of there before he got caught. He didn't even really look at the woman standing there. He just got up, went to her bedroom, and slipped out the window. His house was down the road, so he ran home and didn't think about it again. That decision probably saved his life, because it wasn't her mom at the door. It was the sister of the woman their mom had been helping. Through her conversations with her sister, she had found out where they lived, their mom's work schedule, when the kids would be home alone. All those little pieces of information, just normal harmless details in everyday conversation, somehow turned into a map for her. I didn't know the details back then. I still don't know all of them now, but I know enough to never want to know more. After Rob left, the woman came inside. Their little brother somehow managed to get away. I think he was in the hallway when it happened. He ran to the neighbors, barefoot in the snow, banging on their doors, screaming until they opened up and called the police. When they got there, it was too late. My friend was dead. They said it was brutal, that she was decapitated, left naked in the bathtub, her head hidden somewhere in the house. The police had to search for it. I don't know exactly where they found it. Some said it was in the closet. Others said it was wrapped like a present under the tree. No one ever really wanted to talk about it. Everyone just said different things, and all of it was horrible no matter what was true. I remember the morning after. My dad came into my room, sat on the edge of my bed. He looked like he hadn't slept all night. His eyes were red, the lines on his forehead deeper than I had ever seen them. He told me what happened in the simplest way he could, that she was gone, that something bad happened, that I wouldn't see her again. I didn't understand at first. How could she be gone? I had just seen her at the bus stop a few days ago. She was wearing this red scarf, the one with the little white stripes near the ends, and her hair was up in a messy ponytail, strands falling out around her face as she laughed with her brother about something stupid he said. She was alive, just a normal girl. And now she wasn't. School was silent that week. Even the teachers seemed like they didn't know what to say. Kids cried in the hallways. Some were quiet, staring at the floor all day, refusing to speak even when called on in class. No one wanted to talk about what really happened. The rumors were too horrible to say out loud, but everyone knew them anyway. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. My dad said it was closed casket, and he didn't think I should see that. I didn't fight him on it. I didn't want to see it either. I didn't want to see her mom's face as she buried her daughter a week before Christmas. I didn't want to see her little brother standing there in the cold, staring at the ground, wondering why this happened. I didn't want to hear the prayers, or the crying, or the sounds of shovels scraping against the frozen dirt. I didn't want to hear anything. I just wanted it to not be real. Christmas came a few days later. I remember sitting in the living room with my dad, staring at the tree. The lights twinkled, reflecting off the shiny glass ornaments. There were presents under the tree, but everything felt heavy and quiet. My dad didn't say much that day. He just sat there staring at the TV that was playing some Christmas movie. The sound turned down so low I couldn't hear what anyone was saying. I sat beside him, opening my presents without really looking at them. Nothing felt like it mattered. I just kept thinking about her, about how she would never open another present, never see another snowfall, never walk down the street with her brother, laughing about something small and stupid. She was just gone, and there was no fixing that. The town changed after that. People locked their doors more. Kids weren't allowed to walk home alone anymore. Parents waited at the bus stops, even in the freezing cold. Everyone knew what happened, but no one talked about it directly. They just said things like, "Be careful," and "You never know these days." But we all knew why. We all knew that monsters weren't hiding under our beds or creeping around our closets. They were real people, walking down the street in old coats, with tired eyes and forced smiles, holding bags from the grocery store, just like everyone else. And you never really knew what was going on in their heads. Years passed, but I never forgot her. Sometimes when I walked past her old house, I'd see her brother outside, taller now, playing basketball alone in the driveway. He looked different, older, sadder. I'd think about how none of us ever really healed from it. We just learned how to carry it without screaming. Even now, as an adult, every winter when the air turns cold and the sidewalks are dusted with salt, I think of her. I think of the last time I saw her, that red scarf, her hair messy from running to catch the bus. The way she smiled at her brother, half annoyed, half amused. I wonder what she would have been like if she had lived. What her laugh would sound like now. What her dreams were, if she ever told anyone. If she was planning to go to college. If she had a crush on someone. If she was excited about her Christmas presents that year. But all I have are questions, because there will never be any more answers. Just an empty space where a girl used to be, where a life used to exist. And the worst part is knowing that even though the rest of us kept breathing, the world just kept moving forward like nothing happened. The snow melted, flowers bloomed in spring, kids laughed again in playgrounds, and the world kept spinning. But for her, it just stopped in the most brutal way possible, and nothing can ever make that okay. That's the thing about real horror. It's not ghosts or shadows moving in the dark. It's not creaking floors or flickering lights. It's the knowledge that someone's life can be taken away in an instant, for no reason, by someone who decided their pain was more important than anyone else's existence. That's what keeps me up at night. That's what makes me check the locks twice before bed. That's what makes me watch people closely, wondering what's behind their tired eyes. Because monsters are real, and they look just like us. I was sitting in my room upstairs, just like any normal day after work. I had come home about half an hour earlier, and I was feeling tired. My back was aching from sitting on that broken office chair all day, and my eyes felt heavy from staring at the computer screen for so long. I had thrown my backpack onto the floor by the side of my bed and kicked off my shoes under my desk. My room was a mess, honestly. There were old snack wrappers on my desk, a half-drunk bottle of water by the window, and my laundry basket was overflowing with shirts and jeans I hadn't folded yet. Outside, the sky was already turning orange and purple, and I had my window cracked open to let in the breeze because it was stuffy in there. My little brother was downstairs watching TV. I could hear the muffled voices and sound effects coming up through the floorboards. He always had the volume up too high, and sometimes I wondered how he didn't go deaf from it. Our dog, a big black Labrador named Millie, was sleeping outside my door in the hallway. She always liked to lay there because she could keep an eye on both the stairs and my door at the same time. She was old, with a white muzzle and cloudy eyes, but still strong and still protective in her own way. I was scrolling on my phone, reading random posts, not really thinking about anything. Just relaxing after work, trying to let my brain switch off before I went down to make something to eat. I remember I was thinking about dinner, actually. Thinking about whether we still had frozen pizza in the freezer, or if I'd have to microwave some leftover rice and chicken from last night. I was hungry, but too lazy to get up yet. Then, out of nowhere, Millie started going nuts. She jumped up so fast I heard her nails scratch against the wooden hallway floor. She started barking loud and sharp, that deep chest bark that always made me jump. She was jumping around like someone was there, nails clacking and sliding on the floor. Her tail was thumping hard against the wall as she turned in circles, and she let out a long howl that made my chest tighten up. She never howled like that unless she saw something that really got her attention, like a stranger at the front door or another dog outside. I frowned, confused, and started to get up from my chair. As I was pushing myself up, I heard a man's voice say, "Ah, that's a good girl." The voice was calm, almost friendly, like it was praising her for doing tricks. But it didn't sound like my little brother at all. It sounded older, deeper. For a second I thought it must be our roommate. He was my dad's friend who rented the spare room from us. He usually didn't get home until later in the evening because of his shifts, but I figured maybe he had come home early today. I said, "Oh, you're home early," as I opened my door. I expected to see him standing there, probably bending down to pet Millie, because she always loved him. I expected to see him with his black backpack still on his shoulder, or maybe his work boots leaving dust on the floor. But as soon as I stepped into the hallway, my stomach dropped. There was no one there. Millie was standing in the middle of the hallway, tail wagging fast, staring at the far end of the hall where it turned towards the bathroom and the stairs down. Her ears were up and forward, like she was listening closely, and her eyes were locked on that empty space. I looked around quickly. There was no one near the stairs, no one in the bathroom. The hallway was dim because the sun had already gone down, and we didn't have any lights on up there yet. The only light was coming from inside my room behind me, and the faint blue glow from my brother's TV downstairs. My heart was beating fast, and I felt cold all over. I called out softly, "Hello," even though I didn't want to. The air felt thick, like when a storm is coming. Millie kept staring at the end of the hallway, tail wagging so hard it was thumping against the wall, and her mouth was open with her tongue out like she was happy. But I couldn't see what she was looking at. Suddenly my brother came stomping up the stairs, the way he always did, like an elephant. He looked angry. He said, "Why'd you get her all riled up?" She's barking so loud I can't hear my show. I turned to him and shook my head. I didn't do anything. I heard someone say good girl, so I thought it was / roommate's name. Isn't he home? My brother's face changed a bit. He looked confused for a second, and then he frowned. No, I thought that was you. I heard the voice too. He stood next to me, and we both looked down the hallway where Millie was staring. I felt a chill on my arms, goosebumps rising. It felt wrong, like the air was heavy and still. Millie finally stopped wagging her tail and sniffed the ground, then walked away like nothing had happened. But she kept looking back over her shoulder at the end of the hallway as she laid back down outside my door. We decided to check the house just in case. I grabbed my butterfly knife from my desk drawer. I never really used it for anything except opening packages, but I held it anyway. My brother grabbed his BB gun from his room. It was one of those cheap plastic ones he got from the flea market. He always kept it by his window to shoot at soda cans outside. We didn't really think we'd find anything, but neither of us wanted to say out loud that we were scared. We started upstairs, opening every closet and looking under the beds, even though we knew no one could hide under there without us hearing. Then we went downstairs. Millie followed us, walking ahead with her tail up, ears forward. She sniffed every corner like she was looking for something. We checked the kitchen, the laundry room, the small bathroom by the back door. Nothing. No shoes out of place, no back door unlocked, no open windows, no sign that anyone had come inside. We even went down to the basement. I hated that basement. It was unfinished, with concrete floors and bare walls, and it always smelled like damp earth and rust. We turned on the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling and walked around slowly, checking behind the old shelves and the pile of boxes we never unpacked from when we moved in 2 years ago. There was nothing there except dust and cobwebs and the sound of our own breathing echoing off the walls. When we were done, we stood at the bottom of the stairs for a second, looking at each other. I could tell he was spooked too, but he was trying to act tough, holding his BB gun like it was going to protect him. We walked back upstairs without saying anything. For the rest of that night, neither of us went anywhere alone. If he wanted something from the kitchen, he'd wait until I was going too. When I finally went to bed, I closed my door all the way and locked it, which I almost never did. I left my window open a crack for the breeze, but I kept thinking about that voice. It hadn't sounded angry. It had sounded calm, friendly even. But it was a man's voice, and there were only 3 of us in that house that night, me, my little brother, and the dog. The next day, our roommate came home from work around the usual time. I asked him if he came home early the day before. He shook his head and said he'd been working all day, even stayed late for overtime. I didn't tell him what happened. I didn't want to sound stupid, but I watched him carefully as he talked, listening to his voice. It wasn't the same. His voice was scratchier, a little higher when he talked fast. The voice we heard was smooth, deep, calm. Weeks went by and nothing else happened. Millie went back to sleeping in the hallway outside my door every day. Sometimes at night she'd sit up suddenly and stare down the hallway again. Every time she did it, my chest would tighten up and I'd feel my hands go cold. But she never barked like that again. Never howled like she did that night. I still think about it sometimes, when I'm home alone or when I'm walking up the stairs at night with the lights off. The sound of that man's voice saying, "Ah, that's a good girl," plays in my head like it happened 5 minutes ago. I wonder if it was just my imagination, or if there was someone in the house who got out without us knowing. Or maybe someone was standing right there at the end of the hallway, and we just couldn't see them. I don't know. I'll never really know. But after that day, I always kept my door locked at night, and I always checked every window before bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever spoke to Millie wasn't supposed to be there. And deep down, I was glad she hadn't run towards that voice, because I don't know what she would have found if she had. I remember that winter night more clearly than I remember most of my early birthdays. It was sometime in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. I was 6, almost 7. My sister was 14, nearly 15. There was a big age gap between us, but we got along better than most brothers and sisters I knew. Maybe because she liked feeling responsible for me, and I liked feeling protected by her. Our parents trusted her to watch me whenever they went out for dinner with friends or drove to nearby towns to visit relatives. That night was nothing different, or at least that's how it started. Our house was small, but it felt big to me back then. It sat near the edge of our little Texas town where desert stretched out forever behind us. Everyone in town knew everyone. It wasn't unusual to leave the doors unlocked or to sleep with windows open in the summer. That night was winter though, and the desert air had gone cold fast after sunset. We kept the back doors and windows shut tight to keep the warm air in. The heater rumbled from the hallway vent every so often, but the air in the common room still felt chilly on my skin. We were both sitting on the carpet in the common room, me with my little blanket wrapped around my shoulders, her with her knees up under her chin. The TV was the big old box type, sitting on a wooden stand with little doors that hid our VHS tapes and board games. The only light in the room came from the TV and the kitchen down the hall, where a yellow glow spilled out and dimmed as it spread into the living room. The show we were watching was something like 48 Hours or Hard Copy. I didn't pay much attention to what it was called. I just knew it was about bad people doing bad things. That night it was about a quiet man who lived next door to some family, and one night snapped, killing everyone inside except a little girl who he took with him. The show showed the cops walking around the neighbor's yard with flashlights, showing yellow tape and blurred out bodies. They said he hadn't been caught yet. I felt a weird, sick feeling in my stomach watching it, but I didn't say anything. I wanted my sister to think I was brave. Behind us, taking up almost the whole back wall, were floor-to-ceiling windows with a big glass sliding door in the middle that led out into the backyard. During the day, sunlight poured through and warmed up the couch and carpet. At night it turned into a giant black mirror. If you didn't turn the porch light on, you couldn't see anything outside, just your own reflection staring back at you. Sometimes if the moon was bright, you could make out the edge of the swing set or the old metal shed by the back fence, but not that night. That night was just black glass. The front door was on the other side of the room, past the coat rack and shoe mat, where the carpet turned into the yellow linoleum of the entryway. It was a heavy wooden door with a small peephole, but no windows. Outside of it, we had a glass storm door that clattered shut every time you let it go. About 45 minutes into the show, I was half leaning against my sister's shoulder and half lying down with my blanket pulled up to my mouth. The newsman on the TV was talking about the manhunt, how the killer could be anywhere, how they had people searching abandoned barns and roadside motels. I was staring at the TV, but also thinking about how cold my toes felt when suddenly there was a loud bam 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 right behind us. I thought my heart stopped. It was so sudden and loud that I couldn't even scream right away. My sister grabbed onto me and we both screamed at the same time, sharp and high like sirens. The banging stopped. Everything went silent. The TV was still on, but neither of us could hear what it was saying. All I could hear was my own heart thudding in my chest, and my ears ringing from how loud our screams were. I stared at my sister. Her eyes were wide and her mouth was open, but she wasn't making any sound anymore. We both sat there on the carpet, the blanket falling off my shoulders, staring at the front door. I started thinking maybe the wind had blown something against it. Out here the winds could blow so hard it rattled the tin roof of the shed and made the swing set creak back and forth, even at midnight. Maybe the rocking chair on the porch tipped over and hit the door. I wanted it to be the wind so badly. I think she did too. A minute or two went by. I don't know how long exactly, just long enough for my teeth to start chattering from fear or cold or both. I felt like I couldn't take a full breath, like my lungs were squeezed tight. My sister was holding my hand so hard it hurt, but I didn't say anything. Just when I started to think maybe it really was the wind, I heard the sound of the storm door outside closing. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. The soft scrape of metal on metal, and the clunk as it latched shut. That sound made my whole body feel hot and cold at the same time. I felt something drip down my nose and realized I was crying. Someone had been out there. Someone had to have opened the storm door to bang on our front door like that. There was no wind strong enough to pull that storm door open. The handle stuck, and you had to yank it hard to get it free. I knew then that it wasn't the wind or a planter tipping over. Someone had come right up to our door. Neither of us moved. I was still sitting on my knees with my legs folded under me, and my sister was crouched halfway between sitting and standing. Her breathing was shaky and fast. I looked down at her hands. They were pressed against her thighs, shaking so much I could see them in the dim blue light of the TV. Then, for some reason I still don't understand, I turned around to look at the back windows. Maybe I was hoping to see the lights of a neighbor or a passing car. Maybe I just needed to look at something other than the front door. As I turned, I saw the reflection of our dim living room in the glass. The TV's glow cast our shadows onto the windows. That's when I heard the sound. The back door knob turned, just a small quiet turn, and the metal clicked softly as it tried to move past the lock. My eyes were locked on it. I saw the handle wiggle back and forth, slow and careful. Someone was gently testing it. My sister hadn't moved yet. She was still staring at the front door. I couldn't speak to tell her to look. I couldn't even breathe. Then all at once, the gentle turning turned into violent shaking. Bam, 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 bam. The glass door jerked back and forth in its frame so hard that the windows around it shook. The glass vibrated, and the whole black wall seemed to ripple with each pull. I could see my reflection shaking, turning blurry, then clear, then blurry again. I felt like I was going to throw up. My chest hurt so bad it felt like my heart was trying to claw its way out of me. I still couldn't scream. My mouth was open, but nothing came out. My sister finally turned around to see what I was staring at. The moment she saw the door handle jerking, she let out a scream, so loud it echoed off the windows. She grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet. My knees buckled from how long I'd been sitting there frozen, so she half dragged, half carried me down the hall to her room. She slammed her door shut behind us. Her room was small, just her twin bed, dresser, and a little nightstand with her reading lamp. She let go of me just long enough to grab the edge of her mattress and shove it onto the floor in front of the door. She grabbed anything heavy she could find, her boom box, her books, her backpack full of school stuff, and piled them on top of the mattress to block the door. I sat on the carpet by her closet, knees pulled up to my chest, blanket wrapped tight around me again. I was shaking so bad my teeth kept knocking together. She grabbed the phone off her nightstand. It was one of those beige cordless phones with the long metal antenna that always bent to the side. She held it in her shaking hands, staring down at the buttons. I could see she was trying to think. Back then you had to dial the sheriff directly, number 911 in our little town. I saw her thumb hover over the numbers, and then she pressed redial instead. I could hear the ringing through the speaker. I didn't know who she was calling, but I didn't care. I just wanted someone, anyone, to come save us. She started talking in broken gasps, her voice so high and thin it didn't sound like her at all. She was telling whoever it was that someone was trying to get into our house, that they needed to get there right now. I heard her say, right fucking now, and the word fuck sounded so strange coming from her mouth that even through my terror I noticed it. My sister never swore, not even when she stubbed her toe or dropped a glass. Hearing her swear like that made everything feel even more wrong. I sat there curled up on the floor, rocking back and forth, staring at her, and then at the door. I was waiting for it to start rattling like the back door had. I kept picturing the doorknob turning, the door jerking back and forth until it broke open. I was so sure we were going to die that night. My stomach felt like it was twisting around itself. Every little noise, the creaks of the house, the heater turning on again with its low rumble, made me flinch so hard my neck hurt. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. Then we saw headlights sweeping across the walls of her room. She crawled to the window and peeked through the blinds. I saw her shoulders sag, and she let out a sob of relief. It was her friend's parents. They pulled up into the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. I heard car doors slam. My sister threw open her bedroom door, shoved aside the mattress and all her stuff with shaking hands, and ran down the hall. I ran after her, stumbling over the blanket around my legs. Her friend's dad was at the front door, knocking and calling out. My sister unlocked it and threw herself into his arms, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. I stood there next to her, gripping her t-shirt so hard my fingers hurt. Her friend's mom came in and hugged me, rubbing my back. I felt so small standing there between them, the smell of cold winter air rushing into the house through the open door. They checked around the house. Her dad walked out onto the porch and around back with a flashlight. He didn't find anyone. There were no footprints in the hard-packed dirt of the backyard. No signs of a person trying to break in. Just a couple of I woke up before the sun that day. The room was cold, and the windows were covered with condensation from the night. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes, feeling that dull ache in my lower back from sleeping on that old thin mattress. I got dressed slowly, pulling on my work jeans that were stiff with dried dirt from the day before. I grabbed my thermos from the table by the door and stepped out onto the porch. The air was wet and heavy with the smell of grass and damp wood. I could see my breath coming out in little clouds. I stood there for a moment, just looking out across the field. The fog was thick and low, hugging the ground and hiding the fence line in the distance. My boots felt cold as I stepped down the 3 wooden steps and walked toward my truck parked by the oak tree. Its metal body was wet with dew, and as I unlocked it, I saw the marks left by my fingers on the cold glass of the driver's window. I drove down the gravel driveway, feeling the stones crunching under the tires. The world felt silent. No birds yet, no cars, no wind. Just the hum of the engine and the scrape of branches that reached out over the road. I turned onto the paved highway and headed west toward the work site. It was a long, empty road lined with pine trees on both sides. The sun was still not up, but the horizon was starting to turn blue. After about 15 minutes, I turned down another gravel road that cut through a thick stand of trees. I slowed the truck down as the road narrowed and curved, making my way through until the trees opened up to the clearing where we were working. It was an old farm property that someone bought to build a new house on, and I was there with a few other guys to clear brush, burn old stumps, and start preparing the area for the construction crew. When I parked, there was only one other truck there. I could see the glow of a cigarette near the big oak stump where Rick always sat before we started. I got out and walked over to him, nodding a hello. He just sat there, staring into the trees, smoke curling up in front of his face. I poured myself coffee from the thermos and sat on a fallen log across from him, feeling the steam rise into my nose as I drank. My hands felt warm around the metal cup. Eventually the other guys showed up, one by one, their trucks crunching up the gravel drive and their headlights sweeping through the trees. We started working as the sun rose. It was just like any other day, really. We cut small trees with chainsaws, hauled brush into piles, burned what we could in metal barrels. The smell of burning would mixed with the smell of fresh pine sap. My arms felt tired by noon, and the front of my shirt was wet with sweat. After lunch, the boss told me to take the ATV up the hill to check the fence line at the north edge of the property. I was glad to get away for a bit. My shoulders hurt from lifting logs all morning, and driving the ATV sounded easier. I grabbed the keys from the toolbox in the back of my truck and climbed onto the small red ATV. The seat was cracked and the handlebars were sticky from sap or fuel. I couldn't tell which. I drove slowly up the narrow dirt trail that curved along the hill. The trees got thicker as I went up, and the light felt dim even though the sun was out now. The trail was rough with deep ruts from rain, and I had to keep shifting my weight to keep from tipping over. As I went higher, I started seeing the old fence posts that lined the edge of the property. Most of them were leaning or broken, and the wire was rusted and sagging to the ground in places. I stopped at a section where a large pine tree had fallen across the fence. The trunk was thick, probably 3 feet across, and the roots had torn a huge hole in the earth when it came down. I turned off the ATV and climbed off to take a better look. The ground was uneven here, covered with moss and rotting pine needles. The smell was strong, like damp earth and old wood. I walked around the base of the fallen tree, checking to see if I could cut it away later with a chainsaw. The roots had left a pit where they ripped out of the ground, and as I stepped closer to it, I saw that it wasn't just a hole. It looked like the edge of the pit had broken away to reveal something underneath. I crouched down and pushed aside some loose dirt with my gloved hand. Under the dirt was a dark hole, about 2 feet wide. It was lined with old stones, stacked on top of each other like a well. I felt a cold draft coming up from it. I bent down further to look inside. The hole went straight down into darkness. I couldn't see the bottom, but I could smell it. It smelled like old wet rock and something sour, like rotting leaves or maybe dead animals. I stood up quickly and wiped my hands on my jeans, feeling uneasy. I told myself it was probably just an old well or root cellar from when this place was a farm. Still, I didn't like standing near it. The pit was quiet, no echo, no drip of water, just silent. I felt my skin crawl. I decided to go back to the ATV and mark the spot so the boss could bring a backhoe later and fill it in. I turned back to the ATV and started walking toward it. I had only taken a few steps when I heard a sound behind me. It was faint, but clear enough to make me stop. It sounded like a scraping noise, like something dragging across stone. I turned around fast and stared at the hole. There was nothing there, just the same darkness. I stood there for a long minute, just listening. The woods felt silent again. No birds, no breeze in the trees. I could hear my own breathing loud in my ears. I shook my head and told myself it was probably a stone shifting in the walls of the pit. I turned back and kept walking to the ATV. As I started it up and turned it around, I felt like I was being watched. I couldn't see anything in the trees, but I felt it, like eyes on the back of my neck, making my shoulders tense up. I drove down the hill faster than I should have, bouncing over ruts and rocks, gripping the handlebars tight. Back at the work site, I parked and walked over to the boss to tell him about the pit. He just nodded and said we'd deal with it later. The rest of the day passed slow. My mind kept going back to that dark hole in the ground. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The mossy stones, the cold draft, that sour smell. We finished work around 5. I got in my truck and drove back down the long highway toward home. The sun was setting behind me, turning the sky pink and orange. My eyes felt heavy, and my body was sore. I just wanted to eat and sleep. When I got home, the house felt cold and dark. I turned on the lamp by the couch and sat down, pulling off my boots. I could still smell the smoke and pine sap on my clothes. I made a quick dinner of eggs and toast and ate it standing by the counter, staring out the small kitchen window into the dark yard. I could see the reflection of my own face in the glass, and behind it, just darkness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My mind kept playing tricks on me, making me hear that scraping noise in my memory over and over. Around midnight, I got up and made tea just to have something hot in my hands. I sat at the table, listening to the quiet creaks of the old house. The clock ticked on the wall. The fridge made a faint humming sound, but otherwise it was silent. I decided I needed to get it out of my head. I put on my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and walked outside. The air was cold and smelled like wet dirt. I walked down the gravel drive to where the field started. The grass was tall and moved in waves when the wind blew. I just stood there for a while, feeling the wind on my face, trying to calm down. But then I saw it. At first I thought it was nothing, just a shadow from the trees. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw something standing near the edge of the field, right where the grass met the woods. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, and thin. I could see the shape of it against the dark tree trunks. It didn't move. It just stood there. My chest felt tight. I lifted my flashlight and aimed it at the figure. The beam cut through the dark and landed on a tree trunk. There was nothing there. I lowered the light and blinked hard. My eyes were playing tricks on me. I turned around and walked back to the house quickly, my boots crunching the gravel. Inside, I locked the door and sat on the couch, breathing hard. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I went back to the work site. I kept looking at the tree line as I drove up the gravel road. Everything looked normal. We spent the day burning more brush piles. In the afternoon, the boss sent me up the hill again to mark more broken fence posts. I didn't want to go, but I didn't argue. I drove the ATV up the trail, the same as before. The woods were quiet. When I got near the fallen tree, I slowed down. I could see the pit from the trail, dark and open between the roots. I parked the ATV and sat there for a moment, engine idling, just staring at it. I felt that same cold feeling in my chest. I climbed off and walked closer. The dirt around the edge was disturbed, like something had been moving there. I crouched down and looked into the hole. It was still just dark. I listened. No sound, just the distant rumble of the ATV behind me. I was about to stand up when I saw something at the edge of the darkness. It looked like a small piece of cloth caught on a stone. I reached down and grabbed it. It was old and dirty, gray with dark stains on it. I turned it over in my hand. It looked like a piece of a shirt or pants, torn and frayed at the edges. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. I dropped it and stood up quickly. I backed away from the hole and turned to go back to the ATV. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the handlebars. I drove back down the trail without looking back. When I got back to the site, I told the boss about the cloth. He just shrugged and said it was probably an old rag from the farmers who used to live here. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. That night, I dreamed about the pit. I dreamed I was falling into it, deeper and deeper, and something was waiting at the bottom. I woke up sweating and gasping for breath. The next day, I called in sick. I don't really talk about these things much anymore. There was a time when they shaped my life every day, but these days I try to just keep them buried deep down where they can't touch me. Still, sometimes, on quiet mornings when I wake up before the sun and the world feels still and hollow, I remember everything again like it never left me. I had just graduated high school back then. Life felt open, like there was nothing stopping me from doing anything I wanted. I'd been working part-time at a hardware store, saving money for college, or maybe just for freedom, and I felt like I was finally stepping away from being a kid. I thought my life was just getting started. I remember that morning so clearly it's like the memory is burned into my eyes. I woke up in my room, the small square one with posters of rock bands and a little old TV in the corner, and I felt a weird quiet in the house. It was summer, so the air was warm already, and the sun came through the blinds, dust floating in the light. I stretched and got up, thinking about cereal or maybe toast, and I opened my bedroom door. I walked down the hallway like any other morning, my bare feet against the wood floor, hearing the creaks I always heard. I didn't think anything was wrong. There was just that quiet, a kind of emptiness. When I turned into the living room, I saw my dad lying there on the floor. His arms were twisted in a way that didn't look right, and his eyes were open but not blinking. I ran to him. I remember screaming, "Dad," but it felt like the word was stuck in my throat, like it couldn't even get out of me. I dropped to my knees next to him and started CPR. I'd learned it in health class and thought it would work. I pushed on his chest, felt his ribs shift under my hands, breathed into him, pushed again, but he wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. His skin was already cool. I tried so hard, but it felt like I was pushing against a wall that wouldn't move. I don't know how long I was there, trying to save him, tears dripping down onto his chest, while my own breathing turned into choking gasps. When the paramedics came, they told me he'd been dead for hours. It was his heart, they said. Just stopped in the middle of the night. That's what people say. Just stopped, like it's something simple, like a car engine that ran out of gas. But it wasn't simple for me. It wasn't simple at all. I think something in my brain broke that day. After the funeral, after the family left, after the casseroles went cold and the cards were stacked on the kitchen table, I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. But it wasn't just seeing him dead. It was knowing that if I walked down that hallway again, I would see him dead all over again, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I started having nightmares where I was back in my room. I'd wake up in the dream, thinking it was morning, and I'd start walking down the hall. Each step was heavier than the last. I could feel my feet sinking into the floorboards. My chest would tighten. I knew what I was about to see, but I couldn't stop myself from walking. I'd get right up to the living room doorway, and I'd see his legs on the floor, his feet twisted sideways, and I'd start screaming before I even saw his face. Then I'd wake up in my bed, my throat raw from screaming for real. It kept happening, almost every night for a year. I started staying awake for days at a time, because sleeping meant seeing him again. I'd sit on the floor in my room with my back against the wall, staring at the door, knees pulled to my chest, just listening to the sounds of the house. The fridge humming, the heater clicking on, the distant traffic if the window was open. Anything to keep me grounded in the present. I drank so much coffee my hands shook nonstop. My body started feeling like it didn't even belong to me anymore. I lost track of time. I'd wake up after finally passing out on the floor and not know if it was morning or night. I think I started to go crazy. Then one afternoon, maybe late spring or early summer, I broke. I was sitting in the living room with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, just sitting there trying to watch TV, pretending to be normal. Suddenly my whole body went stiff. I remember feeling like my brain was stuck on one memory, like a record skipping over and over. She told me later that my muscles locked up so hard I looked like I was having a seizure. It lasted almost an hour. In my mind, it felt like days. I was back in my nightmare. I was waking up in my room again, walking down the hallway again, feeling that heavy dread in my chest again. But this time it didn't end when I screamed. I stopped myself from going into the living room. I just stood there at the end of the hall screaming, over and over, a scream that felt like it came from my bones. My wife told me that in real life I was screaming too. Every time I tried to step into the living room in the dream, my body would lock up again, and I would scream. It happened again and again until finally, I couldn't hold back. I had to see him. I stepped forward and walked into the room, and there he was, lying on the floor just like before. I fell to my knees next to him, and I didn't try to save him this time. I just sat there crying. In the dream I stayed there for what felt like hours, just holding his cold hand. When I came out of it, I was drenched in sweat, and my wife was crying, holding me tight. I felt empty, completely drained. But after that, the nightmares stopped. I never had that same dream again. It was like my mind had finally accepted it. Years passed. I got older. Time moves whether you're ready or not. In 2005, I joined the army. I wanted a purpose. I wanted to feel strong again, like I had control over my life. They sent me to Iraq. I was leading convoys through desert roads, endless sand and heat waves shimmering off the ground. Every day was hot and smelled like dust and oil and sweat. You learn to live in that fear, to carry it like another piece of gear strapped to your vest. One day we had intel that insurgents were using children, sending them out into the road to stop convoys so they could ambush us. We were told not to stop, to keep going no matter what. That morning I was leading the convoy, driving down a cracked asphalt road lined with bombed-out buildings. The sun was burning through the windshield, and sweat dripped down my back under my armor. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that I always felt on convoys, waiting for an IED to go off or for gunfire to rip through the glass. Then I saw him. A kid. Couldn't have been more than 10 years old. He ran out into the road about 300 meters ahead of me, arms flailing, barefoot, wearing a long, dusty shirt. My hands froze on the steering wheel. For a second I thought about my little cousins back home, their small hands and scrawny arms. I couldn't move. My truck chief was screaming at me to floor it. He was pounding the dashboard, cursing, telling me to keep going or we were all dead. My brain felt like it was made of thick mud. Finally I pressed down on the gas. The truck roared forward, and the kid dove out of the way at the last second. We sped past him, my chest heaving like I'd just run 10 miles. Later that day we got to the FOB. I parked the truck and went to my cot. My whole body felt numb, my muscles shaky from the adrenaline wearing off. I lay down on the thin mattress in the dim tent, the smell of diesel and sweat and sand filling my nose, and I closed my eyes to sleep. But sleep never came easy for me. As I drifted off, my mind started its dark work again. I was dreaming I was driving. Same road, same heat, same vibration of the armored truck under my hands. I saw the kid run out again, but this time I didn't freeze. I floored it and hit him. The truck thumped over his small body, tires bouncing up and down. My stomach twisted. In the dream I stopped the truck. I had to see him. I got out and walked to the back, each step making my legs shake harder. My boots crunched in the sand and gravel. I rounded the rear bumper, expecting to see the boy's crushed body. But instead, it was my father, lying on the cracked desert road with his arms twisted the same way they were on our living room floor all those years ago. His eyes were open, staring up at me with that empty look. My chest felt like it was caving in. In the dream, I dropped to my knees and started screaming. It was that same primal scream I used to have in my nightmares, the one that ripped out of me without words or thought. A scream that wasn't just from my lungs, it was from my whole being. Then I woke up, but I wasn't in my cot. I was outside, running full speed. My feet pounded the hard dirt and gravel of the FOB. I didn't even know where I was at first. I just kept running until I couldn't breathe anymore. When I finally stopped, bent over with my hands on my knees, sweat dripping off my nose onto the ground, I realized I was on the far side of the base, near some shipping containers. My heart was hammering in my chest, so hard it felt like it might burst. My whole body was shaking. I sat down on the ground, pulled my knees to my chest, and just sat there breathing, staring at the dusty rocks between my boots. After that dream, I didn't have the nightmares anymore. Not that exact one, at least. But it left a scar in my mind. It's been years since Iraq. I have a wife now, kids, a job that doesn't involve guns or death, or driving through towns waiting to explode. But I'm always afraid. Afraid of sleeping. Afraid of dreaming. Afraid that my mind will take me back there again and show me things I can't unsee. Some nights I lie awake in bed, listening to the quiet house, feeling the weight of the memories pressing down on my chest like someone is sitting there. I look at the dark ceiling and feel that old dread crawling up my throat. I wonder if my kids will ever have to see me dead the way I saw my dad. I hope not. I hope they never have to carry that with them. I don't know if the nightmares are gone for good or just hiding. My mind is like a dark forest at night. I walk through it with a flashlight that barely reaches 10 feet ahead. Anything could be out there in the dark, waiting to jump out at me. But for now, I'm still walking. I'm still here. That's all I can really say. I still remember that day clearly, down to the way the morning sun looked when I left the house. It was a Thursday. I had woken up groggy because I hadn't slept well the night before. I think it was around mid-October because the trees in our front yard were already half bare, and the lawn was littered with yellow leaves that stuck to my shoes when I walked to my truck. I remember feeling annoyed about it, thinking I should rake them before they got wet and messy. It was chilly enough that my breath made small clouds when I exhaled, but not cold enough yet to see frost on the windshield. I didn't bother warming up the truck for long before driving off to work. The roads were clear that morning. I remember that because I got to work about 10 minutes earlier than usual. I sat in the parking lot drinking coffee from a metal thermos, staring at the steering wheel, just thinking about the day ahead. Back then, work felt like a routine I walked through with my eyes closed. I worked for a distribution company as a logistics supervisor. My job was to keep track of shipments going in and out, making sure drivers had their schedules, and calling clients to confirm delivery slots. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. It was just something I did. I remember clocking in, scanning my card through the reader near the break room, and nodding to a few coworkers. The building smelled like coffee and dust, the way it always did in the mornings. There was an odd comfort in it back then, knowing that each day started with the same noises. The beep of scanners, the rolling carts echoing down the warehouse lanes, the low murmur of forklifts reversing with their warning beeps. I went to my desk, switched on the computer, and sipped coffee as I pulled up the day's schedules. It was a couple of hours into the shift, maybe around 10, when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first because my wife was calling from her mobile, and she usually didn't call me during the day. She worked nights at the hospital, so daytime was when she caught up on sleep. Seeing her name on the caller ID made me worry immediately. I thought something had happened at home, or maybe she needed me to bring something on my lunch break. When I picked up, her voice sounded strange. She wasn't crying or panicked, but her tone was low and uneasy. She told me I needed to call my friend Danny. I asked her why, thinking maybe she heard something on the news about him or saw something on Facebook that bothered her. She just said, "I had a dream, but I can't remember it. You need to call him and make sure he and his family are okay." I remember the way she said that. It wasn't frantic, but there was something about the way her words came out that made me feel cold. It's hard to explain. It was as if she wasn't talking to me from our house down the road, but from somewhere far away, like an echo from a cave. There was an emptiness in her voice that felt heavy. I asked her again what she meant, and she repeated that she couldn't remember the dream. She just knew it involved Danny, and that I needed to call him. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. I felt embarrassed even thinking about calling him. I'm not the kind of person who calls people to talk about dreams or gut feelings, but there was something about her voice that made me do it anyway. I dialed Danny's number. He picked up after a couple of rings, sounded a bit surprised to hear from me in the middle of a weekday morning. We hadn't spoken for a few weeks, just casual texts about football scores or weekend plans. I told him my wife had a dream and wanted me to check in. He laughed softly, that kind of polite chuckle you give someone when you don't really get the joke, but you're trying to be kind. He told me everything was fine, that his wife was at work, his son was in school, and he was working from home that day because he had a mild cold. He thanked me for checking in and asked me to thank my wife for her concern. I ended the call feeling foolish. I shook my head, almost embarrassed that I let my wife's weird intuition push me into making that call. I called her back and told her Danny said everything was fine. She didn't sound relieved. She just said, in that same distant voice, and then she hung up. The rest of the day went by like normal. I finished paperwork, argued with one of the drivers about a late delivery, and walked around the warehouse to check on some damaged pallets. By the time I clocked out, I had almost forgotten about the call altogether. The sky was already darkening when I left work, that gloomy autumn dusk that happens so early in the evenings. I remember seeing the streetlights flickering on as I drove past, orange halos glowing in the chilly air. When I got home, my wife was awake in the living room, sitting on the recliner with a blanket over her legs. The TV was on but muted. She was staring at it without really watching. I remember her face looked pale and tired, her dark hair messy around her shoulders. I asked her if she was okay, and she just shrugged, saying she felt weird all day, like something heavy was sitting on her chest. I went to the kitchen to grab leftovers for dinner, and while I was reheating them, I checked my phone out of habit. That's when I saw a missed call and a voicemail from Danny. It was left just after 5 that evening. I remember feeling confused, thinking maybe he wanted to chat more about the call that morning. I pressed play on the voicemail and listened. At first, I couldn't even understand him. His voice was shaking, words coming out choked and cracked. He told me his uncle from Florida had called him earlier that afternoon to tell him that Danny's son had been found dead. He had hanged himself in the bedroom closet. His son was 13. I stood there in the kitchen, holding the phone to my ear with the microwave humming behind me, staring at the floor tiles. The beige linoleum pattern blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I walked into the living room and sat on the armrest of my wife's recliner. She looked up at me, saw my face, and she already knew. I didn't even have to say the words. Her eyes welled up, and she pulled the blanket tighter around her chest. For a long time, we just sat there in silence, the only sound in the room coming from the muted TV, flickering images of a cooking show playing out in silence. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat in the kitchen alone. I couldn't stop thinking about Danny, about his wife, about their son. I tried to imagine what his morning was like, waking up thinking it was a normal day, getting my call, laughing about my wife's strange dream, probably rolling his eyes after hanging up. Then, just an hour later, getting another call that split his world open in a way it would never heal from. I thought about my wife too, the way she knew something was wrong without knowing what it was. She didn't even remember the dream, only that Danny and his family were in it, and that it felt wrong. I remember looking at her that night as she slept, her hair spread out on the pillow, her chest rising and falling softly. I wondered what it felt like to carry that sort of intuition, to feel something dark approaching without any explanation. It seemed like a burden I was glad I didn't have. I never told Danny the full story. I never told him that my wife felt something was wrong before it happened. I figured it would only make him feel worse, like the world was full of signs that he couldn't read, warnings that he couldn't hear. What good would it have done? He had already lost enough. There was no comfort to offer him in that moment. I sent flowers to his house. I went to the funeral a week later, stood in the back in my only black suit, watching the way his wife clung to him as they sat in the front row. His son's photo was on a small table next to the casket, a picture of him from their last family vacation, wearing a goofy bucket hat and smiling with his front teeth missing. He looked so young in that picture. I kept staring at it, feeling the tears gathering in my eyes, feeling them run down my face. I didn't wipe them away. I just let them fall. After the funeral, I walked back to my truck alone. The parking lot was half empty, and the cold wind blew leaves around my feet as I walked. I sat in the driver's seat with the door open, just listening to the wind rustling the oak trees that lined the cemetery grounds. I remember thinking about all the little moments in life that don't feel important when they happen. A phone call, a dream, a conversation about nothing, a half-finished cup of coffee. Then suddenly one of those moments breaks open and shows you the darkness that was hidden behind it all along. That night, I drove home with the radio off. My wife was sitting at the dining table when I walked in, holding a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up at me, and I could see her eyes were red from crying. I sat down across from her, and for a long time neither of us spoke. There wasn't anything left to say. We both just sat there, staring at the steam curling up from her cup, feeling the silence in the house settle heavy around us like dust. After that day, I thought a lot about life and death, about how close we all walked to the edge without knowing it. I still think about Danny sometimes. We lost touch after a while. I guess grief changes people, makes them drift away from everything that used to feel normal. I think he moved away eventually. I heard from someone that he and his wife divorced a couple years after their son died. I can't imagine the kind of pain that does to a person. As for my wife, we stayed together for a few more years after that. Eventually, we separated and then divorced. There wasn't one reason, just a lot of small reasons that added up over time. I still think about her sometimes, wonder if she still gets those feelings, those dreams that brush past her mind like a cold wind. I wonder if they still haunt her. Sometimes, when I'm driving home from work late at night, I find myself thinking about that morning, about how normal everything felt when I woke up. The leaves on the lawn, the taste of lukewarm coffee in my thermos, the dusty smell of the warehouse, and how beneath all that normal, there was a darkness quietly blooming, getting ready to split open a family's life forever. It makes me feel small, knowing how little control we have over any of it. I don't believe in premonitions or fate. I don't believe I woke up before my alarm that day. The sun wasn't up yet, and the whole room felt cold, not because it was winter, but because I'd left my window open overnight without realizing. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling fan that wasn't moving. I could hear the quiet ticking of my old clock on the bedside table. It was too early to get up for work, but I didn't feel like sleeping anymore. My body felt heavy from yesterday's gym session. My arms sore when I stretched to rub my eyes. I sat there in silence, just breathing for a while, letting the early dawn dimness soak into my eyes until I finally got up and went to the bathroom. I turned on the tap and let the cold water run before splashing my face. The mirror was foggy from the sudden change in temperature, but I wiped it with my palm. My hair was a mess, sticking up in all directions, and there was a faint red mark on my cheek from sleeping on top of my hand. My eyes were puffy. I filled my glass with water and drank it while looking out of the window beside the kitchen sink. It was still mostly dark, though the sky near the hills was turning a dull gray. The street lights were still on, casting long beams onto the empty road. I decided I would go for a walk before work. I hadn't done that in a while. My neighborhood was quiet and safe, small single-story houses with tiny front gardens and white metal gates. There were a few old trees lining the road, and sometimes you would see cats walking on the walls. I changed into sweatpants and a hoodie, pulled on my trainers, and stepped outside. The cold air made me flinch for a second, but it felt fresh against my skin, so I started walking down the pavement with my hands in my pockets. The road was empty. No cars were passing by, no dogs barking in yards yet, no kids going to school. It felt peaceful, just the sound of my footsteps and the distant chirping of some birds waking up. I walked down to the small park near the end of my street. It was just a patch of grass with 3 benches and a broken swing set that squeaked whenever the wind blew strong. I sat down on one of the benches and stared at the swing moving slowly back and forth. There was a slight breeze, just enough to keep the chains shifting. After a while, I stood up again and kept walking, deciding to go around the block before heading back home to shower and get ready for work. As I turned a corner, I noticed a white car parked on the side of the road with all its windows fogged up from the inside. I didn't think much of it at first. Probably someone waiting for a friend or trying to nap before their shift. I kept walking past it, but I couldn't help looking back once, wondering why the headlights were slightly on, casting a dim light onto the curb. It looked empty, but the back window was too foggy to see clearly. I walked on, shaking the thought away, and focused on the cool air hitting my face. My nose felt numb by the time I reached back home. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, shutting the world out again. I took a hot shower to get rid of the cold in my bones. The water hit my back, and I stood there for a while, closing my eyes and letting it run down my head. Afterwards, I made toast and coffee. The toast was burnt on one side, and I scraped off the black bits with a knife, watching them fall into the sink. My coffee tasted bitter, but I drank it anyway. I checked my phone. I had a missed call from an unknown number around 4 a.m. No voicemail, just a missed call. I didn't call back. It was probably spam or some automated marketing nonsense. I got ready and left for work, locking the door behind me and checking the handle twice to make sure it was shut. The drive to work was uneventful. The roads were getting busier, and school vans were pulling up to houses to collect kids. I reached the office on time, scanned my card at the entrance, and went up to my desk. The day passed slowly, work emails, calls, meetings, the usual. When it was finally time to leave, I felt drained. I said goodbye to my coworker sitting next to me, packed my bag, and left. The sun was still up, but it was getting close to dusk. The sky was turning golden, and the clouds looked pink near the horizon. On the drive back, I saw that same white car parked near the park. It was in a slightly different spot, but I recognized it from the morning. Its windows were still fogged up, and it had moved just a few meters down. I slowed down my car for a second to look at it. This time, I saw the outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat, but their head was turned away, leaning against the window. The lights were off now. I felt uneasy, but I kept driving. It wasn't my business. That evening, I cooked rice and chicken curry for dinner, ate it while watching some random show on YouTube, and washed my plate afterwards. I lay down on the couch for a bit, scrolling on my phone mindlessly. Later, I took my trash out to the street bin. The street was quiet again, with just a couple of porch lights on. When I walked back inside, I locked the door and checked the windows to make sure they were shut tight before going to bed. The next morning, I woke up again before my alarm. My body felt tense, like I'd had a nightmare but couldn't remember it. I got up and went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth while staring blankly at myself in the mirror. I went to the kitchen to drink water, and as I stood there by the sink, I noticed the same white car parked directly across the street from my house. Its windows were still fogged up, and this time I saw the driver's seat was empty. The back seat window had a small circle wiped clean, like someone had rubbed it with their palm to look out. A chill ran down my spine. It was too early to call anyone about it. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I made coffee and sat at the table, staring at the car through the gap in my curtains. I kept thinking, what if someone was hiding in the back seat? What if they were watching houses, waiting to break in? My mind was racing with worst-case scenarios. When I left for work, I locked the door and walked quickly to my car, glancing at the white car as I passed. The inside looked dark. I couldn't see anything through the fogged windows except that clear circle at the back. The day at work went by with that thought stuck in my head. Every break I got, I found myself thinking about that car, who was in it, what they were doing, why they moved it slightly each day but never left the street. By evening, my curiosity was mixing with fear. On the way back, I drove slowly past it again. It hadn't moved this time. It was parked under the street light, and I could see faint marks on the windshield from where someone had wiped away condensation with their hand. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. I kept waking up every hour, checking my window, looking at the car across the street. Around 3 a.m., I saw movement inside. Just a slight shifting of shadow, like someone sitting up straighter. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear the blood in my ears. I lay back down, staring at the ceiling, my hands cold and clammy. I didn't know if I should call the police. What would I even tell them? That someone was parked in their own car on a public street? The next morning, I decided I would walk past it before work. I wanted to see who was in it. I left my house early, wearing a hoodie to hide my face, and walked down the pavement. As I approached the car, my steps slowed. The windows were still fogged, but that circle at the back was bigger now, like someone had pressed their face against it overnight. I felt sick to my stomach. My breathing got faster, and I forced myself to keep walking until I passed it completely. I didn't look back. When I reached the end of the street, I stopped and turned around to see the car from a distance. I could see a shadow in the back seat. It was definitely a person, sitting upright, facing forward, their head bent down slightly. I walked quickly back home, locked my door, and sat down on the floor with my back against it, heart racing. I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick, then sat by my window, watching that car for hours. Around noon, a garbage truck passed by, and the driver honked at the white car to move out of the way. No one came out. The garbage truck drove around it and continued down the road. I realized whoever was inside wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. That evening, just before sunset, I gathered enough courage to walk up to the car. My hands were shaking as I approached it. I could smell something strange as I got closer, like rotting food or old sweat. I stood there, trying to see through the front window, but it was too dark inside. I knocked lightly on the driver's side window. No response. I knocked again, a bit louder this time. Still nothing. My stomach twisted. I bent down to peek through the small wiped circle on the back seat window. At first, I saw nothing but dark shapes. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized I was staring at someone's knees, pulled up to their chest. Their arms were wrapped around their legs, and their head was bent down between their knees. They weren't moving at all. I felt bile rise up in my throat. I banged on the window, shouting for them to wake up, but there was no reaction. I called the police immediately. My voice was shaking so much I could barely get the words out. They arrived within 15 minutes, 2 cars pulling up with flashing lights. Neighbors came out to see what was happening. I stood there shivering as the officers knocked on the window, then forced it open when there was no response. They opened the back door, and I saw one of them step back quickly, covering his mouth. The smell hit me even from where I was standing. They pulled the body out onto the pavement. It was a man, probably in his 40s, wearing a dirty hoodie and jeans. His skin was grayish, his hair matted with sweat, and his eyes were half open, dried out. He'd been dead for a while. One of the officers told me to step back and asked if I knew him. I shook my head. My knees felt weak, and I sat down on the curb, staring at my shoes. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. The neighbors whispered among themselves. Some of them looked at me like I'd done something wrong. Later, the police told me he was a homeless man. He'd probably been living in his... I woke up early that morning feeling heavy. My body didn't want to get out of bed, but my mind was already awake. I could hear the wind brushing against my window, the faint whistle of morning air sneaking through the cracks. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should even bother getting up or just turn off my alarm and sleep the day away. But eventually, I forced myself up. My room felt colder than usual. The floor felt like ice under my feet. I walked over to the window and looked outside. The sky was still that soft bluish-gray color it turns before sunrise. I could see the trees in my backyard swaying slightly. The neighbor's dog was barking again, probably at a squirrel or something invisible to everyone but him. I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and washed my face with freezing water. My reflection looked tired. There were small dark circles under my eyes. I had been staying up late every night for the past week, scrolling through my phone or reading random articles until 2 or 3 in the morning. I didn't even know why. I felt like I was looking for something to keep me awake, as if I was scared of falling asleep too soon. After I washed up, I got dressed in a gray hoodie and old black jeans. My shoes were by the door. They were dirty from the last hike I went on with a friend a few days back. We had climbed a small trail on the edge of town. I remembered how quiet it was up there, how the trees stood still like they were holding their breath. I grabbed my backpack from the kitchen chair and left the house without eating breakfast. My stomach felt tight anyway, like it didn't want food. Outside, the air was sharp in my lungs. The sun was starting to rise, turning the sky pale yellow. I walked down my driveway and headed towards the main road. The streets were quiet. Only a few cars passed me. Their headlights cut through the dim morning light. I kept walking until I reached the bus stop. No one else was there. I sat on the cold metal bench and waited. I could hear birds chirping somewhere behind me. I watched the sun slowly climb over the rooftops. After about 15 minutes, the bus arrived. I stepped on, scanned my card, and sat in the middle. There were only 3 other people, all sitting by themselves. An old man near the front stared out the window with blank eyes. A woman in scrubs scrolled through her phone. A teenager with a skateboard sat with his head down, earphones plugged in. I leaned my head against the window and closed my eyes for a while. I could feel the vibrations of the bus through the glass. My stop was near the edge of town, close to an area that wasn't fully developed yet. There were some new houses under construction, piles of gravel, and empty lots with tall grass and weeds. The bus dropped me off, and I started walking towards the site. I was meeting someone there for a small job. I had been taking odd jobs lately to keep money in my pocket. My actual job at the grocery store didn't give me many hours, so I picked up whatever small work I could find. This one was simple. I just had to take photos of the area for a guy who was thinking of buying the empty lot. He didn't want to drive all the way there himself, so he paid me to do it. Easy money, I thought. I walked down the gravel road that led to the empty lot. My shoes crunched against the stones. The wind picked up, pushing against my hoodie. The lot was big, covered in yellow grass that came up to my knees in some places. A few trees grew near the back, twisted and bent from years of strong winds. There were tire tracks in the dirt, probably from construction trucks or people turning around when they realized the road didn't go anywhere yet. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. I took wide shots, close-ups of the ground, the trees at the edge, the view of the road from the lot, everything the guy would need to see. As I moved around taking photos, I felt a strange stillness in the air. The wind had stopped. The grass stood frozen. Even the trees seemed to pause. I could hear my own breathing, quiet but sharp in the silence. I shook off the feeling and kept walking. I reached the back of the lot near the trees. The ground there dipped down slightly, like a shallow bowl. I stood there and took a few photos of the tree line. I was about to turn back when I noticed something odd on the ground near one of the trees. It looked like a black bag or cloth half buried under the dead leaves and grass. I walked closer, pushing the grass aside with my foot. It was a backpack. An old, faded black backpack with dirt and grass stuck to it. I crouched down and touched it. It felt damp. I opened the zipper slowly. Inside, there were a few notebooks, some pens, and a small plastic water bottle. The notebooks were wet at the edges, but the inside pages were dry. I flipped through one quickly. It was filled with small, messy handwriting. None of it made sense to me. Just random sentences, notes about birds and trees, lists of things like bread, eggs, batteries, matches, lighter fluid. Another page had a rough drawing of a small cabin or shed. I looked around but saw no one. The grass moved again with the wind. I felt my chest tighten a little. There was no cabin or shed nearby, only the trees and the empty lot. I put the notebook back and zipped up the bag. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me thought about taking it with me, but something told me to leave it there. It didn't feel right to touch it any more than I already had. I stood up and took a photo of it where it lay, then turned and walked away quickly. I felt like the trees were watching me leave. As I walked back towards the road, I felt uneasy. My shoulders felt heavy, like someone was pressing down on them. I reached the gravel road and walked back towards the bus stop. The bus came after a while, and I got on, sitting in the same spot as before. I looked out the window, watching the empty lot disappear behind me. I couldn't stop thinking about that backpack. Whose was it? Why did they leave it there? Where were they now? I felt a cold feeling deep in my stomach. When I got home, I emailed the photos to the guy who hired me. He sent me the money within an hour. I tried to distract myself by cleaning my room, doing laundry, and watching random videos online, but my mind kept drifting back to the backpack. Later that afternoon, I decided to look up any news about that area. I searched for missing people, accidents, or any reports of someone disappearing. I didn't find anything recent. Just an old news article from 3 years ago about a man who went missing while hiking in the woods north of town. They never found him. He was last seen wearing a black backpack. My chest felt tight when I read that. I clicked on the article and looked at his photo. A middle-aged man with dark hair and tired eyes. The article said he often went hiking alone, exploring small trails and wooded areas near town. They searched for weeks but found nothing. His car was parked near a small gravel road that led to an empty lot. The same lot I had just been to. My throat felt dry. I sat back in my chair and stared at the wall for a long time. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that backpack lying in the grass. I imagined him walking out there alone, writing in his notebook, then just disappearing. The next morning, I woke up early again. The sky was cloudy and gray. I felt like I needed to go back. I didn't know why. Something about it felt unfinished. I got dressed quickly and left the house without eating. I took the bus to the same stop and walked down the gravel road. The air felt colder than the day before. When I reached the lot, I walked straight back to where I found the backpack. But it was gone. The ground was disturbed, the grass bent down where it had been, but the backpack itself was missing. I looked around, scanning the tree line and the tall grass, but saw nothing. My chest felt hollow. The trees swayed gently. I stood there for a long time, just listening to the wind and the distant sound of cars on the main road. I don't know how long I stood there before I turned and walked away. On my way back to the bus stop, I felt like I was being watched. Every step felt heavier, like I was walking through water. I kept my eyes forward and didn't look back. When I got on the bus, I sat down and stared at the floor. My mind felt numb. That day at home, I didn't do anything. I just sat on my bed, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. In the weeks that followed, I went back to my normal routine. Work, home, sleep. But I kept thinking about that backpack, about the man who went missing, about how it just disappeared overnight. I never went back to that lot again. Sometimes when I walked down the street or sat on the bus, I felt like someone was watching me from far away, like a shadow standing behind a tree, just out of sight. But life went on. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The memory faded slowly, buried under other worries and other days. But sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I think about that morning, about how the wind stopped, how the trees stood still, how the world felt like it was holding its breath. And I wonder what really happened out there, and if some questions are better left unanswered. Because the truth is, I never found out what happened to that man. I never found out where the backpack went. And deep down, part of me knows that I don't really want to know. Because some things are better left where we find them. Some things aren't ours to touch or carry or fix. They belong to the silent places, to the empty lots and the quiet forests where the world doesn't quite reach. And when I think about that, I feel a coldness deep in my chest. The kind that makes you realize how small you really are, and how the world doesn't owe you any answers. It just keeps moving, with or without you, like the wind through the trees, like the quiet shadows on an early morning, like the echo of footsteps on a gravel road that no one else can hear. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating on the table next to my bed. It was still dark outside, and the glow of the screen lit up my room just enough for me to see the outline of the wardrobe against the far wall. I reached over, grabbed the phone, and saw that it was only 4:38 a.m. I sighed, placing it back down. I had set an alarm for 5:30 a.m. because I needed to leave early to get to a job site. I worked construction, mostly ground prep and framing. That morning we were heading out to a new subdivision. They were starting on the west side of town, and the boss told us we had to be there by 6:30 a.m. to unload the lumber before traffic picked up. I closed my eyes, hoping to drift off for that last hour, but it didn't come. My mind was awake now, thinking about the day ahead. After about 10 minutes of staring at the ceiling, I decided there was no point trying to sleep again. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and sat for a moment, feeling the cold wood floor under my feet. I rubbed my eyes and reached for the hoodie hanging from the chair, pulling it over my head as I stood up. I walked to the bathroom, flipped on the dim yellow light, and turned on the sink faucet to splash some water on my face. My eyes looked tired in the mirror. My hair was a mess, sticking up on one side, flattened on the other. I wet my hands and ran them over my hair, pushing it back to look somewhat normal. I brushed my teeth, then left the bathroom, grabbing my work pants from the hook on the wall and pulling them on over my boxers. I put on my socks and boots by the door, lacing them tightly, feeling each tug wake me up a bit more. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker, listening to it hiss and drip while I grabbed my lunch bag from the fridge. It was leftovers from last night, rice, boiled eggs, and a few pieces of fried chicken. I tossed it into my bag with a bottle of water. I poured coffee into a travel mug, added sugar, then grabbed my keys from the hook by the door. As I stepped outside, the air hit me hard. It was humid, sticky even though the sun hadn't come up yet. The cicadas were still humming, and I could hear crickets somewhere in the grass. I walked to my truck, threw my bag in the passenger seat, and climbed in, closing the door softly so I wouldn't wake my neighbors. My headlights lit up the gravel driveway and the trees lining the edge of the yard. I backed out slowly, then turned onto the narrow road that led to the highway. The road was empty at that hour. The only lights were from the occasional farmhouse porch or from dim yard lamps flickering on fence posts. I sipped my coffee, feeling the warmth spread down my chest. I turned on the radio, keeping it low, just enough to hear a country song mumbling through static. As I drove, the sky began to lighten, turning from dark blue to a pale gray. I reached the highway ramp and merged on, picking up speed. My truck rumbled over the cracks in the pavement, the suspension squeaking softly each time. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed a sign for a gas station ahead. I didn't need gas, but I figured I'd stop to use the bathroom before getting to the site. I pulled off, rolling into the lot as the first hints of orange lit up the sky behind the building. The lights inside were bright, fluorescent, making the place look colder than it actually was. I parked, climbed out, stretched my arms, and walked inside. The cashier, an older man with thin gray hair, was standing behind the counter, eyes half closed, staring at his phone. I nodded to him, and he didn't even look up. I walked to the bathroom in the back. The floor was sticky, and the toilet seat was stained with old watermarks, but I didn't care. I finished, washed my hands quickly, and headed back to my truck. When I got back on the highway, there were a few more cars around, mostly other trucks carrying equipment. I drove with one hand on the wheel, sipping my coffee again, feeling a little better. After another 15 minutes, I turned off onto a side road leading to the new development site. It was just a dirt path right now, with tire tracks dug deep into the soft ground. I could see the outline of the work trailer up ahead, and a few trucks already parked near it. I pulled in, parking next to one of the older guy's trucks. I shut off the engine, grabbed my bag, and climbed out. The ground was soft under my boots, a bit muddy from the storm 2 days ago. I walked to the trailer, opened the door, and was hit with the smell of stale coffee and damp wood. The guys inside were talking quietly, waiting for the boss to show up. I set my bag down in the corner and sat on an upside-down bucket, resting my elbows on my knees. I closed my eyes, listening to their low voices mixing with the hum of the fluorescent light above us. After about 10 minutes, the boss showed up. He was a big man with a thick beard and a permanent frown. He told us what we needed to do: unload the lumber, stack it along the south end of the site, and then start digging the forms for the foundation footings. We all filed out of the trailer and headed to the trucks. The sun was up by now, casting long shadows across the cleared field. We started unloading, the smell of fresh-cut lumber filling the morning air. The sound of it slamming onto the dirt and gravel was loud, echoing across the empty lots. By noon, it was hot enough to make your clothes stick to your skin. I was soaked in sweat, wiping my forehead every few minutes with the sleeve of my hoodie. We broke for lunch and sat in the shade of the trailer. I ate quietly, listening to the sound of a generator humming in the distance. Flies buzzed around us, landing on our food every chance they got. After lunch, we went back to work, digging the forms and setting up the string lines to keep everything level. Around 3 in the afternoon, the boss told me to take the pickup and head back to the yard to pick up some rebar they forgot. I didn't mind. It was a chance to sit in the AC for a bit. I grabbed the keys from him and walked over to the pickup, climbing in and turning on the engine. The cold air blew over my face as I pulled out of the site and back onto the main road. The drive to the yard was about 30 minutes away, down a long stretch of highway bordered by woods and fields. The windows were up, the radio was off, and it was quiet except for the hum of the tires on the pavement. About halfway there, I saw something up ahead on the side of the road. At first I thought it was just a piece of tarp or a trash bag caught in the grass, but as I got closer, I realized it was an old car. It was off the road, buried halfway in the ditch, covered in dirt and weeds that had grown up around it. The windows were missing, and the metal was rusted through in places. It looked like it had been there for years. I slowed down as I passed it, looking at the way the grass grew up into the undercarriage. It reminded me of a skeleton buried in the ground, only the bones sticking out. I kept driving, shaking off the feeling it gave me. When I got to the yard, I pulled up to the rebar rack, loaded up the back of the truck, and strapped everything down tight. I checked my phone before leaving. No new messages. I climbed back in, turned the truck around, and headed back to the site. As I was driving back, I kept thinking about that car. I had driven this road a few times before, but never noticed it. Maybe the grass was cut back recently, exposing it, or maybe I just never paid attention. Either way, it stuck with me, and as I drove past it again, I slowed down, looking at it closely. The trunk was open, hanging down into the ditch, and the interior was just bare rust and torn-up seat foam. I noticed what looked like an old tarp stuffed into the trunk. I could see the corner of it flapping slightly in the breeze. I drove on, trying not to think about it, but something in my stomach felt heavy. I made it back to the site, and we finished the day without any problems. At the end of the day, I climbed back into my own truck, waved to the guys, and started the long drive home. It was nearly dark by the time I reached that stretch of road again. I saw the outline of the car up ahead. The sun was down, but there was just enough light left to see the shape of it in the ditch. As I passed, I glanced at it again, and I swear I saw the tarp moving, like someone shifting under it. My heart started beating faster. I slowed down, almost to a stop, and stared at the car through the passenger window. The tarp wasn't moving anymore. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, the dashboard lights casting a pale green glow over my hands gripping the wheel. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to just keep driving, pretend I didn't see anything. But another part of me, the part that had been taught to always check, to always make sure, told me to go look. I pulled off onto the shoulder and turned on my hazards. I sat there for a minute, gathering myself. The cicadas were loud outside, buzzing in the tall grass. I opened the door slowly, the dome light turning on above me, and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder. I left the engine running and walked carefully down the slight slope toward the ditch. The grass was tall, up to my knees, and it scratched at my legs as I pushed through. When I got closer to the car, I could smell the rust and wet earth. The metal was cold under my hand as I grabbed the edge of the trunk and looked inside. At first I didn't see anything except the tarp. It was old, stained with dirt, and torn along one side. I leaned in a bit more, pushing the tarp with the toe of my boot. That's when I saw it. Underneath the tarp was a pair of shoes. They were old, covered in mud, but they were clearly shoes. I felt my stomach tighten. I reached down and grabbed the edge of the tarp, pulling it back slowly. What I saw made me step back so fast I almost fell into the grass behind me. There was a body in the trunk. The clothes were rotted and torn, and the skin was gray, almost blending in with the rusted metal of the car. The smell hit me then, a thick, sour stench that made my eyes water. I turned away, covering my mouth with my hand, trying not to throw up. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my ears. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the I woke up before sunrise like I always did. It was still dark outside. I could hear the quiet hum of the small refrigerator in the kitchen and the ticking of the old wall clock near my bed. I lived alone in a small rented house at the edge of town, not far from the main road, but far enough that I felt surrounded by emptiness at night. The area wasn't rural, but it felt quiet and lonely. I could see a field from my back window and a line of trees that hid the houses on the next street. I liked waking up early. It gave me time to think. Sometimes I would make tea and stand at the back door, watching the faint light spread behind the trees. That morning I did the same. I boiled water, poured it into my old chipped mug, and stepped outside onto the back porch. The wood creaked under my feet. The air was cold. My breath showed in the dim light. The ground smelled like wet dirt. It had rained the evening before, and the grass was still damp. I stood there sipping tea, looking at the trees, seeing nothing unusual. Everything felt normal. After finishing my tea, I went inside to get ready for work. I worked at a small repair shop in town. I fixed electrical tools, cleaned engines, checked wiring. It wasn't a big job, but it paid enough to live alone and keep my small house. I packed my lunch, washed my mug, and locked the door behind me before walking down the cracked driveway to my car. Driving to work felt normal. The sun was rising by then, turning the sky light orange and pink. I saw the same people on the road. A man walking his dog near the corner, two old women chatting by the bus stop, a boy riding his bicycle fast down the footpath. Nothing felt off or different. I worked through the day, fixing a customer's old table fan, rewiring a vacuum cleaner that smelled burnt inside, and tightening the loose bolts of a small lawn mower. By evening, my back hurt a bit from leaning over the work table. I closed the shop, locked the shutters, and drove home as the sky turned gray and blue again. I felt tired but peaceful. I stopped at the small store near my street and bought bread, eggs, and 2 instant noodle packets for later in the week. I greeted the cashier with a nod, paid, and walked out into the quiet evening. As I stepped into my car, I saw a man standing on the other side of the road, near the old telephone pole. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, his hands in his pockets. I couldn't see his face well because it was getting dark, and he was facing away from the streetlight. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Maybe he was waiting for someone or just taking a walk. I drove home, parked my car, and carried the bag of groceries into my house. I cooked rice and lentils for dinner. While cooking, I felt uneasy for no reason. I kept thinking about the man by the telephone pole. There was no reason to feel worried, but I felt it anyway. I ate dinner sitting near my small living room window, looking outside. It was pitch dark. Only my porch light made a small bright circle outside the door. I couldn't see anything beyond that. After eating, I washed my plate and went to bed early. I couldn't sleep. My mind felt restless. I turned from side to side. I closed my eyes, but my ears felt alert to every noise outside. I heard the wind move through the trees, a car passing on the road far away, and the faint scratching sound of branches brushing against the roof. I forced myself to keep my eyes closed. Sometime later, I fell asleep. I woke up again in the middle of the night. I didn't know what time it was. My room was dark. The moonlight was faint through the thin curtain. My heart was beating fast, but I didn't know why. I lay there listening. The house was silent. The refrigerator still hummed, and the clock still ticked, but there was another sound mixed with them. A softer, rhythmic sound. I held my breath and listened harder. It sounded like footsteps on wet grass. Slow and careful. They came from behind my window, near the back porch. I felt frozen. I didn't move a muscle. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, maybe a stray dog or a cat, but the footsteps were too heavy and deliberate. They weren't small animal feet. They sounded like the steps of a man walking slowly across the yard, trying not to make noise. I stayed in bed, holding my breath until my chest hurt. The footsteps stopped near the window. I could hear breathing. Not loud, but enough to know someone was standing close. My curtain was thin, but it was dark outside and I had no lights on, so unless someone pressed their face to the window, they wouldn't see me. I didn't move. My neck felt stiff. My heart felt like it would burst. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. I couldn't hear the breathing anymore. I couldn't hear footsteps moving away either. I stayed like that for a long time, not moving, barely breathing. My mind felt tired from fear. At some point, I drifted off to sleep again without realizing it. The next morning, the sun woke me up. I got out of bed feeling sick and shaky. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside quickly. The yard looked normal. The grass was damp with dew. Nothing seemed out of place. I unlocked the back door and stepped onto the porch. I looked around. I saw faint marks in the wet dirt near the edge of the porch steps. They looked like shoe prints, pressed deep enough to be recent. The toes pointed towards the porch, not away. I felt my stomach twist. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? What would I say? That I heard footsteps at night? That there were footprints near my porch? They would come, look around, and say there was nothing they could do. I knew it. So I told myself it was probably a drunk man walking home from the road who wandered into my yard by mistake. I cleaned up, ate breakfast, and went to work, trying to force it out of my mind. For the next few days, nothing happened. I came home from work, cooked, ate, and slept. But I felt on edge every night. I kept the porch light on. I checked the locks twice before bed. Every little sound outside made my chest tighten. The wind in the trees, the old pipes groaning, even the neighbor's dog barking far away, made me feel like something was wrong. One evening, I came home late from work. I had stayed back to finish cleaning the workbench and sorting the tools. The sky was already dark when I parked my car. As I stepped out, I felt that same unease I had felt the first time I saw the man by the telephone pole. I carried my small tool bag inside, locked the door behind me, and turned on the kitchen light. I was heating leftovers when I heard it again. Footsteps outside. This time it was on the side of the house, near my bedroom window. Slow, careful steps on gravel and dirt. I turned off the stove and stood there, silent. My ears strained to hear. The footsteps moved closer to the back door. I moved to the living room and switched off that light too. Now the house was dark except for the kitchen. I stood there in the darkness, feeling sweat roll down my back. The footsteps stopped. I waited, my knees shaking. Then I heard the porch steps creak. One step, then another. I could almost feel the vibration through the floorboards. My mouth felt dry. I moved quietly to the side of the window and peeked out through the small gap in the curtain. I saw a figure standing on my porch. It was the same man from near the store, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His hood was up, hiding his face in shadow. He stood there, unmoving, facing the door. I couldn't see his hands. My heart pounded in my ears. I watched him for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute. Then he turned slowly, stepped off the porch, and walked around the side of the house out of view. I stayed frozen for a while. I didn't know where he went. I moved to the back window and peeked out. The yard was empty. My chest hurt from breathing too fast. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch holding a hammer I kept from the repair shop, staring at the door until sunrise. The next morning I went outside to check again. The ground near the porch was disturbed. Shoe prints deep and clear. The steps had mud smudged on them where he walked. I decided to buy a lock for the gate near the driveway. I also bought a small camera and fixed it near the back porch light, pointing towards the steps. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have anyone to tell anyway. My parents lived in another city, and we weren't close. That night, I felt a bit safer knowing the camera was there. I slept early out of exhaustion. At around 2 a.m., I woke up. My room was dark and silent. I didn't hear anything but my own breathing. I lay there, eyes open, listening. Then I heard a soft scraping sound from the back porch, like something sliding against the wooden railing. I got out of bed slowly, took the hammer again, and walked to the living room. I stood by the window, listening. The scraping stopped. I switched on the porch light from inside and looked out through the window. There was no one there. The yard was empty under the yellow light. I stood there staring for a while, then turned off the light and went back to bed. The next morning, I checked the camera footage. I sat at the small kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling through the night's recording. For hours, nothing. Just darkness, faint tree movement, and bugs flying past the lens. Then at around 1:45 a.m., I saw him. The man in the dark jacket walked into frame from the left side. He walked slowly, crouched down, and moved to the steps. He looked up at the camera directly, as if he knew it was there. His face was shadowed by the hood, but I could see part of his mouth. He smiled. Then he stood there for a while, staring at the camera, before turning and walking out of frame. My chest felt tight. I didn't know what to do. I saved the footage. I decided to go to the police that day after work. I felt sick the whole day. My hands shook when fixing a drill for a customer. My boss asked if I was okay, but I just nodded. After closing the shop, I drove straight to the small police station in town. Inside, the air smelled like I woke up earlier than usual that day. My alarm wasn't even set, but my eyes just opened to the dim blue light coming through my window. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and everything felt cold. The blanket felt heavy on me, but not in a comforting way. More like it was holding me down. I lay there for a few minutes, listening. The fan above me was still spinning from the night, clicking every once in a while when it wobbled. I could hear some birds starting outside, but faint, like they were far away. My chest felt tight for some reason, like I had been dreaming something bad, but I couldn't remember anything. I forced myself to get up. The wooden floor was cold under my feet. I walked to the bathroom, turned on the light, and squinted at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. My eyes were puffy, and my hair was pressed down on one side from the pillow. I washed my face and brushed my teeth, and the cold water felt like it slapped me fully awake. I didn't want to go to work that day, but I knew I had to. The office was only a 20-minute drive, and I usually left after breakfast, but since I was up early, I figured I'd just leave early and get some stuff done before everyone else came in. After getting dressed in my usual black pants and gray hoodie, I put on my shoes by the door and grabbed my bag. I stood there for a second, looking around my small apartment. The little kitchen with a sink full of 2 bowls and a mug. The small table with 1 chair pulled out. The old brown couch with a blanket folded on one side. Everything felt quiet. I left the lights off and walked out, locking the door behind me. The hallway was empty and smelled like dust and old paint. I walked down the 3 flights of stairs to the parking lot. There were only 2 other cars there at that hour. My breath came out like smoke in the cold morning air. I got in my car and started it. The radio came on, quiet static humming until music started. I turned it off. I didn't want noise. I just sat there for a few seconds, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. I felt uneasy, like something was wrong, but I couldn't tell what. I shook it off, put the car in gear, and pulled out onto the street. The roads were empty. The street lights were still on, making the pavement look orange under them. As I drove, the sun started to come up behind the hills. It made the sky turn from dark blue to gray, and then to a pale yellow. I passed by closed shops and dark houses. I stopped at a red light, even though there were no other cars. I looked at the empty crosswalk, at the sidewalks, at the dark windows of a bakery on the corner. Everything looked frozen. I kept going. Soon I was on the main road that led out of my neighborhood. On the left there was a large field with tall grass that looked silver in the morning light. On the right there was a line of trees, thin and tall with no leaves, just dark branches reaching up. There was fog between the trunks, thick in some places. I glanced at it as I drove past, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing among the trees. Just a shape, dark and still. But when I looked again, there was nothing there. Just fog and trees. I shook my head and kept driving. I told myself I was just tired, that I needed coffee, that it was probably just a dark patch of fog shaped like a person. The road curved, and soon the trees were gone. I felt better once I saw the first gas station open. Its bright lights spilled out onto the road. I decided to pull in and grab coffee. I parked by the window and went inside. The cashier was stacking gum packs on the shelf by the counter. He didn't look up as I walked in. The store smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. I went to the back, grabbed a paper cup, and filled it with the strongest coffee they had. I added some powdered creamer and stirred it with a wooden stick. The smell made me feel more awake, but the uneasy feeling in my chest didn't go away. I paid, nodded at the cashier, and left. Outside, the sun was higher now, turning the fog into glowing white clouds on the ground. I sat in my car, drinking the coffee with both hands around the cup. It was too hot, burning my tongue, but I didn't care. I just needed to feel something sharp, something that pulled me back to the present. I finished half the cup and put it in the holder. I drove back onto the road. The highway to the office was only 5 minutes away. I was thinking about what reports I had to finish when I saw the car in front of me slow down suddenly. I pressed my brakes and saw that there was a dog in the road ahead. A big black dog. It wasn't moving, just standing there in the middle of the lane, staring at the oncoming car. Its head was low, and its body looked tense. The car in front of me honked, and the dog jumped slightly, but didn't run away. It just stood there, looking at the car. I felt a shiver run up my back. There was something wrong with the way it was standing. Its legs looked stiff, its tail was down, and its ears were pressed back. The car tried to go around it, moving onto the other lane slowly. As it passed, the dog turned its head to follow it, but didn't move from its spot. Now I was the one right in front of it. I slowed down and stopped, keeping a bit of distance. I could see its eyes reflecting red in my headlights. Its mouth was closed, and it was breathing fast. I could see its chest moving up and down quickly. I waited for it to move, but it didn't. I honked once, but it just flinched and then stood still again. I felt my skin crawl. It felt like it was staring right at me, not like a normal dog, but like it was thinking something. I decided to drive around it too. I moved slowly onto the opposite lane and passed it. As I did, I turned my head to look at it from the side window. Its body was shaking slightly. Its fur looked dirty and matted, and there were patches missing. I could see its skin underneath. It looked thin, like it hadn't eaten in days. Its ribs were showing under its black fur. But what scared me the most was that it didn't look scared of the cars. It looked angry. I drove off, looking in my rearview mirror until it disappeared from sight. My heart was beating fast. I couldn't stop thinking about its eyes. They didn't look like an animal's eyes. They looked human, full of hate. I shook my head again, trying to clear the feeling away, and focused on the road. Soon I was pulling into the office parking lot. There were only 3 other cars there. I parked in my usual spot and sat there for a minute, finishing the rest of my coffee. My hands were shaking. I didn't know why. It was just a stray dog, probably sick or starving, but something about it felt wrong. I kept seeing its eyes in my head. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. I spent the whole day working, trying to focus on spreadsheets and emails. People came in and out of the office, talking about their weekends and complaining about deadlines. I just nodded and kept typing. But every once in a while, I'd stop and think about that dog. The way it stood in the road, refusing to move. The way it stared at me. By the time lunch came around, I didn't feel hungry. I just drank water and kept working. When it was finally time to leave, the sun was already setting. The sky was orange and pink outside the office windows. I packed my bag and walked out. The parking lot was half empty. I unlocked my car and got in, sitting there for a few minutes before starting it. I felt tired and heavy. My head hurt from staring at the screen all day. I drove home, taking the same road I took in the morning. As I neared the spot where I saw the dog, I slowed down slightly, looking around. But there was nothing there. Just the road, the grass, and the trees. I felt relieved and kept driving. Soon I was back in my neighborhood, pulling into the small parking lot by my apartment building. I parked and sat there for a bit, staring at the steering wheel. The sky was getting dark now, and the streetlights flickered on, one by one. I got out and walked up the stairs to my apartment. The hallway smelled like old pizza. Someone must have thrown out their box without closing the bag. I unlocked my door and went inside. It was cold and dark. I turned on the small lamp by the couch and dropped my bag on the floor. I sat down heavily, leaning back and closing my eyes. My head was pounding now. I felt sick. I sat there for a long time, not moving, just listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. After a while, I forced myself to get up and make something to eat. I boiled some instant noodles and ate them standing by the counter. They tasted bland, and the broth felt like warm water going down my throat. When I finished, I washed the bowl and left it upside down on the rack. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly to look outside. The parking lot was empty except for 2 cars. The streetlights made the ground look yellow and the shadows look black. I looked over to the line of trees at the end of the lot. They were swaying slightly in the wind, and then I saw something move between them. At first I thought it was just shadows, but then it stepped forward into the light. It was the dog. Its black fur looked even thinner in the light, its ribs sticking out. Its eyes were reflecting again, like 2 red dots staring straight at me. I froze, holding the curtain with my fingers. It stood there at the edge of the trees, its body low to the ground, like it was about to pounce. But it didn't move. It just stared. I let the curtain fall back in place and stepped away from the window. My heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to pass out. I stood there in the middle of my small living room, staring at the curtain, waiting for something to happen. I didn't know what to do. Call animal control? Call the police? It wasn't attacking anyone. but it was there, watching me. I turned off the lamp and stood in the dark, peeking out from the side of the curtain again. It was still there. Its head was low, its ears pressed back. I could see its breath in the cold air. I backed away slowly and went to my bedroom. I closed the door and sat on the bed, curling up with my knees to my chest. I stayed like that for hours. I woke up to the sound of my alarm. It was 5 in the morning, still dark outside, but I had decided the night before that I would go for a run today. I hadn't been running in a while, and I felt my body needed it. I lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quiet it was. The whole apartment complex was asleep. I could hear the faint humming of the fridge from the kitchen and the ticking of my cheap plastic clock on the wall. I pushed the blanket aside and sat up, rubbing my eyes. My room was cold. I stood up and felt the chill on my bare feet through the thin carpet. I grabbed my sweatpants from the chair by my desk and pulled them on, then pulled a hoodie over my head. I slipped into my running shoes that I kept by the door and grabbed my phone and keys. When I stepped outside, the cold morning air hit my face. I took a deep breath. The sky was still dark, with just a hint of light far off in the east. I started stretching near the stairs of my building. The streets were empty, and there was no one around. Only the streetlights were on, casting long orange glows across the empty road. I put my phone in my hoodie pocket and started jogging down the street. I lived in a small town. The roads curved through quiet neighborhoods, and the houses were mostly single-story homes with old trucks parked in their driveways. As I ran past them, I could smell the wet grass and the faint smell of pine trees from the park nearby. My breath came out in little clouds that floated away behind me. I jogged along the main street, past the closed gas station and the dark grocery store. There was an old man who worked at the gas station every morning. I sometimes saw him smoking outside when I drove to work, but today was too early even for him. I turned left towards the park trail. It was a narrow paved path that ran along the river. In the daylight, it looked peaceful with families walking their dogs or kids riding bikes. But right now it was just empty. The trees on both sides were tall and dark, their branches hanging over the path. The river was barely visible, only a faint silver line moving through the shadows. I slowed down to a walk for a minute to catch my breath. The only sound was my footsteps and the quiet rustling of leaves in the breeze. As I walked, I kept looking around. Something about the darkness made everything feel different. Like the trees were closer than they were in the day. Like the path was longer and the river deeper. I started jogging again, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I ran for about 15 minutes, passing the wooden bench that faced the river. I always saw old couples sitting there on warm afternoons, feeding ducks or just watching the water. But now it was empty, and the wood looked dark and wet. As I kept running, I saw something up ahead on the path. It was hard to see in the dim light. At first I thought it was a log or a fallen branch, but as I got closer, I saw it was a bike. It was laying on its side, half on the path and half in the grass. The back wheel was still slowly turning. I stopped running and just stood there, breathing hard, staring at it. I looked around but didn't see anyone. There was no other sound except the river flowing quietly behind the trees. I walked slowly towards the bike. It looked like a mountain bike, black with red stripes on the frame. The chain was off and hanging loose, and the seat was twisted sideways. I felt a tight feeling in my chest as I looked at it. It felt wrong, like whoever had been riding it had left in a hurry. I stood there for a while, looking around again and again, waiting to hear footsteps or see someone come jogging down the path. But no one came. I thought maybe a kid had left it there and walked home, or maybe someone was hurt and needed help. I started looking around in the grass and trees beside the path. I didn't want to go too far off the trail because it was still dark and I didn't have a flashlight. I called out softly, but my voice felt too loud in the quiet morning. There was no answer. I walked further up the path, looking for anyone. After about 20 feet, I saw something else. It looked like a black backpack, laying open near the base of a tree. I walked towards it. The zipper was halfway open, and some books were sticking out, along with a small water bottle. I didn't touch it. I just looked at it and felt my chest tightening even more. It felt like I was seeing pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. I turned around and looked back down the path. The bike was still laying there with its wheel turning slowly. I looked around at the trees, trying to see if there was anyone hiding or laying down. That's when I saw something further down towards the river. There was a narrow dirt trail leading from the paved path down to the water. I walked towards it, stepping slowly on the dry leaves and twigs. As I reached the riverbank, I saw fresh footprints in the mud. They looked like they belonged to sneakers, about the same size as mine. The footprints led down to the edge of the river and then just stopped. I stood there, staring at them. The water was calm, moving slowly under the faint light. I looked around at the trees on both sides of the river, but didn't see anyone. I felt my heart beating hard in my chest. It felt too quiet. I stood there for a few minutes, listening. I thought maybe someone had slipped into the water. I couldn't see very far because the trees on the other side cast dark shadows over the river. I kept looking at those footprints, wondering what happened here. I started feeling like I shouldn't be there, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. I walked back up to the paved path. The air felt colder now, or maybe it was just my body feeling nervous. I looked at the bike again. It felt wrong to leave it there, but I didn't want to touch it. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. It was nearly 6. The sun would be rising soon, but it was still dark under the trees. I thought about calling someone. The police, maybe. But I didn't know what to tell them. There was just a bike and a backpack. No blood, no body. Nothing that proved anything bad happened. But something in my gut told me something was wrong. I started jogging back towards my apartment. I kept looking over my shoulder as I ran. The trees felt like they were watching me. I tried to focus on my breathing and the sound of my shoes hitting the pavement, but my mind kept thinking about that bike and the footprints in the mud. By the time I got back to the main road, the sky was turning a pale blue. A few cars passed me, people heading to work. I slowed to a walk near the grocery store. My legs felt heavy, and my chest was tight. I felt like I had left something unfinished back there. When I reached my apartment complex, I climbed the stairs to my floor. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my door. I walked in and locked it behind me, then leaned against it, trying to slow my breathing. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself some water. My hands were still shaking, and I spilled some on the counter. I drank the rest and put the glass down, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I felt like I needed to do something, so I grabbed my phone again and searched the local police department number. I called them and told them what I saw. They asked me some questions about where exactly the bike was and what it looked like. I told them everything, even about the footprints. After I hung up, I sat on the couch, staring at the wall. The sun was coming up now, and my room was filled with a gray light. I felt tired, but my mind was racing. I kept thinking about what I saw. I didn't go to work that day. I just sat there, staring at the wall, waiting for my phone to ring. A few hours later, it did. It was a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was the police. They told me they checked the area and found the bike and backpack, just like I said. They also found more footprints leading further down the river, but no one was there. They asked if I knew who the bike belonged to, and I said no. They thanked me for calling and said they would keep looking. I hung up and sat there for a long time. My hands were still shaking. I kept thinking about whoever those footprints belonged to. Where were they now? Did they fall in the river? Did they run away? Did something happen to them before I got there? I didn't know. And that was the worst part. The sun was high in the sky now. I stood up and looked out the window at the quiet street. Cars were passing. Kids were walking home from school. People were carrying groceries to their apartments. Everything looked normal. But I knew it wasn't. Somewhere out there, someone was missing, and I was the only person who saw the first signs of it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock and the quiet hum of the fridge. I kept thinking about those footprints ending at the river, and the bike laying there with its wheel still turning. The image was burned into my mind. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. It was still dark outside. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, feeling the cold air on my feet. I didn't feel like running that day. I didn't feel like doing anything. I just sat there, thinking about how something so normal, a morning run, could turn into something that made me feel like this. Nervous, scared, worried about a stranger I never even saw. A few days later, I saw on the local news that they found a body down the river, about 5 miles from where I saw the bike. It was a young man, a college student. They said he probably slipped and fell into the water and drowned. The police thanked whoever called about the bike, saying it helped them know where to start searching. I sat there on my couch, watching the news, feeling my chest tighten again. For a long time after that, I didn't go running in the morning. Every time I thought about it, I saw that bike laying on the path, the wheel turning slowly in the dark. I saw the footprints ending at the water, and I thought about how fast life can change. One moment you're riding your bike along the river, the next you're gone, and no one even knows until a stranger jogging by sees your bike in the dark. And that's how it ended. Not with a scream, not with flashing lights or sirens or anything dramatic. Just quiet, just darkness, a bike, foot. I woke up before my alarm went off that morning. The sun was just starting to rise outside the window, and the room was still dim, with only that gray-blue light you get before full daylight. I lay there for a few minutes listening to the silence. It was a Sunday, so there wasn't any traffic on the road yet, just quietness that filled the room like fog. I could hear the ticking of the clock on my bedside table and the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. For some reason, I felt heavy in my chest, like a warning, but I ignored it. I had planned to hike out to the old quarry that day. I'd seen it on Google Maps a few weeks ago and wondered if there was a way to get down into it. I got up, washed my face, brushed my teeth, and put on my faded black jeans and a loose gray hoodie. I made sure my old hiking boots were laced tight. They were cracked along the sides, but still good enough for walking through rough places. I filled a metal water bottle with cold water and shoved a couple of granola bars into the side pocket of my backpack. Then I checked my phone. No messages. I turned it off to save battery and stuffed it in the front pocket of my backpack. I liked going out without my phone on. It felt quieter somehow. I left my small apartment and locked the door behind me. The hallway was empty, the floor cold under my boots. I walked down the 2 flights of concrete stairs, each step echoing, and then stepped out into the early morning air. It was cool and smelled like damp earth and exhaust fumes from the trucks that passed on the main road during the night. The sky was washed out, pale blue with streaks of white cloud. I pulled the straps of my backpack tighter and started walking toward the trail that led behind the town. My town was small, just a collection of houses, a gas station, 2 general stores, and a row of small shops. At the edge of town, the asphalt gave way to dirt and gravel roads, and beyond that, the land rolled into wide fields and then woods. I followed the road for about half a kilometer until I reached the small path that cut off to the left, leading toward the hills. I'd walked it before many times. It felt safe, normal, familiar. But that morning something felt different. I kept glancing behind me every few steps, expecting to see someone following, but there was nothing except the empty path. I walked for a good hour before I reached the tree line. The woods were thick and green, the ground damp from rain the day before. The smell of wet leaves and soil rose up around me as I stepped onto the narrow trail. Birds chirped high in the branches, and I could hear the distant sound of water running. I kept walking, breathing in the sharp, clean smell of pine needles crushed under my boots. After another hour, the trees thinned out and the ground began to slope down sharply. That's when I saw the edge of the quarry. It was wider than I'd thought from the map, almost like a crater. The sides were steep, made of exposed brown and gray rock, with loose gravel and broken stones scattered along the edges. Down at the bottom, it looked flat, with weeds growing through cracks in the stone. I walked along the rim slowly, trying to find a way down. I found a spot where the slope wasn't as steep, a narrow path worn into the stone from rain and time. I tested it with my boot. It held. I began to descend sideways, leaning against the slope to keep balance. Small stones clattered and rolled under my feet, sliding down ahead of me. My heart thudded in my chest each time the gravel gave way, but I moved slow, keeping my weight pressed toward the slope. When I reached the bottom, I stood there for a while, just looking around. The quarry was silent. The air was cooler down there. I could see marks on the rock where machines had cut and dug decades ago. There were broken concrete blocks and rusted pieces of metal scattered everywhere, half buried under weeds. In the middle was a huge puddle, almost like a pond, the water brown and still. I walked toward the water, stepping over broken pieces of metal and old boards. I stood there staring at my reflection. The water was so still it almost looked solid. I squatted down and poked at it with a stick. Small ripples spread out but quickly faded, returning to perfect stillness. I felt uneasy looking at it, like something was just under the surface, watching. I stood up and shook off the thought. I walked around the quarry for another hour, looking at old rusted pipes sticking out of the ground and what was left of concrete foundations. There was graffiti on some of the stone walls, faded words and spray paint shapes from kids who probably came here to drink or smoke. I found a spot under a rock overhang and sat down to drink water and eat a granola bar. I sat there chewing slowly, feeling the quiet around me settle deeper. The sun was higher now, and the shadows were sharper. The silence was heavy. I finished eating and stood up to stretch. I decided to walk to the far side of the quarry before climbing back up. As I walked, I heard a faint metallic clinking sound behind me. I froze. The air felt thick around my head. I turned quickly but saw nothing. The quarry was empty, silent again. I kept walking, a little faster now, eyes darting to every shadow, every dip and rock. The clinking came again, this time closer, clearer. It sounded like metal tapping against metal, soft but steady. I turned again. Nothing. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My chest felt tight. I started walking faster, then almost jogging, trying to reach the slope I had come down. The clinking followed me, echoing softly against the stone walls, steady like footsteps. I finally reached the slope and started climbing up, my boots slipping on the gravel. My breathing was harsh in my ears. The clinking didn't stop. It got louder. I scrambled up the last few feet and stood on the rim, looking down into the quarry. At first, I saw nothing. Just the still pond, the rusted metal, the weeds. Then something moved near the middle, by a broken metal frame, half buried in the ground. It was a man. He was wearing dirty jeans and a brown jacket that was stained dark in places. His hair was long and tangled. His beard covered half his face. He was thin, bony, his shoulders sharp under the jacket. In his left hand, he held a crowbar, and he was tapping it against the metal frame, making that soft clinking sound. He didn't look up at me, just kept tapping, slow and steady. My mouth went dry. I stood frozen, watching him. He stopped tapping and turned his head slightly, like he heard something behind him. Then he turned fully and looked straight at me. Even from that distance, I could see his eyes were dark and sunken. He stared at me for a long time, not moving, not blinking. Then he tilted his head to the side very slowly and smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. His lips barely moved, but his teeth showed, yellow and broken. My heart thudded so hard I thought I might faint. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the stones under my boots or the branches that whipped against my arms as I ran through the trees. I ran until my chest burned and my legs felt weak. I stopped only once to look back, but I couldn't see the quarry anymore through the trees. I kept running until I reached the dirt path that led back to town. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my water bottle. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of town and the gravel turned back into asphalt. My boots crunched against the road as I walked the last stretch to my apartment. My shirt was soaked in sweat. I felt like I was going to throw up. When I reached home, I locked the door behind me and sat on the floor, leaning against the wood. My breathing was ragged. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank white wall in front of me, trying to calm down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I felt sick and dizzy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, the streetlight outside casting dull yellow light through the curtains. I kept hearing that clinking sound in my head, over and over. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face looking up at me with that tilted smile. The next morning, I packed up my backpack, grabbed a roll of trash bags, gloves, and a few energy bars. I took the bus to the police station in the next town over. I told them everything. I told them where the quarry was, what I saw, what the man looked like. They wrote it all down quietly. An officer told me to wait there. 2 hours later, they said they'd gone to the quarry. They found signs of someone living there. A makeshift tent hidden behind an old concrete block. Rotten food, burnt cans, and a pile of small animal bones. They said he wasn't there when they checked. They said he was probably just a homeless man who wanted to be left alone. But they thanked me for letting them know. I nodded and left the station. Outside, the air was bright and hot. Cars passed along the road. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalk. Life went on. But that image of him standing there in the silent quarry never left my mind. The way he smiled. The way he didn't look surprised to see me, like he knew I would come. I never went back there. I stayed away from the woods after that. Sometimes, late at night when I walked to the store, I would hear a faint clinking sound behind me. But when I turned, there was only the quiet street and the shadows cast by streetlights. I don't know what he was doing down there or how long he had lived there. But I know I wasn't supposed to see him that day. I still think about how he stared at me, like he was deciding something in his mind. Every morning when I wake up, I hear that clinking in my head for a few seconds before it fades into the sound of the ticking clock and the hum of the fridge. And I feel a cold heaviness in my chest, knowing he is still out there, somewhere, tapping that crowbar against metal, waiting for whoever comes next. I don't know if anyone else would find what happened to me scary, but it still sits in my chest like a heavy rock. Back then I had just turned 24. I was working 2 jobs to afford my rent. One was early morning stock shifts at a supermarket, and the other was delivering groceries in the evenings. Most days I left the apartment before dawn and returned close to midnight. I was always tired, always hungry, always counting coins for bus fare. That day started normally. I woke up at 4. My eyes burned when I opened them, like they always did, from lack of sleep. I brushed my teeth while leaning against the bathroom wall, so I wouldn't doze off standing up. It was still dark outside when I left for the supermarket. I walked past the other apartment doors in silence. The hallway light flickered as I passed under it. It always flickered. I stepped outside into the cold morning air, zipped my cheap jacket up to my chin, and started walking towards the bus stop. Work was normal. Unpack boxes, put things on shelves, slice open cardboard with a rusty blade, sweep stray noodles off the floor, get yelled at for stacking cans wrong. My hands were dry and cracked from the cold storage. I finished at noon. My second job didn't start until 3 p.m., so I went home to rest for a couple hours. I microwaved a small bowl of leftover rice and ate it sitting on my floor, staring at the wall. Then I lay down on my mattress without a blanket, set my alarm, and drifted off instantly. When I woke up, my chest felt heavy. My alarm was vibrating violently beside my head. I sat up too fast and felt dizzy. It was a cloudy afternoon, dim even though it wasn't late. I splashed water on my face, put on my delivery jacket with the reflective stripes, and left the apartment again. My delivery shift was in the city. I used a small motorbike to weave through traffic. The orders came one after another. Heavy water bottles upstairs, bags of rice, crates of eggs, people yelling at me to be careful. My thighs hurt from carrying so much up the narrow stairwells. The apartment buildings in that area were old, cramped, with peeling paint and dark hallways. I was used to the smell of stale cooking oil in every corridor. I didn't think much of it. Around 9 p.m. the orders slowed down. My last delivery was a single bag of groceries. The address was a bit further out, towards the edge of the city where the streets went quiet at night. I checked the map and sighed. It was about 15 minutes away down a long straight road lined with low industrial buildings and shuttered shops. I started the motorbike and headed that way. The road was empty. No cars, no people. Just streetlights standing far apart, leaving wide patches of darkness between them. I drove through those patches, feeling the cold air sting my cheeks. My headlight showed the cracked road surface, pieces of trash blown against the gutter, a few weeds growing out of the sidewalk cracks. I reached the address. It was a small single-story building with metal shutters pulled down over the windows. I checked the number twice to make sure I was at the right place. There was a faint yellow light inside, leaking out from around the edge of the front door. I knocked softly and waited. No one came. I knocked again louder, feeling the ache in my arms from carrying bags all day. Still no answer. I leaned down and placed the bag in front of the door. Then I took a photo for delivery proof and sent it in. I turned back to my motorbike, ready to head home. I was already thinking about the leftover rice I still had in the fridge, and how I would just eat that and go straight to sleep without even showering. That's when I heard something behind me. It was a quick scraping sound, like metal on concrete. I turned around sharply, my heart thumping. The door was still closed. The bag of groceries was sitting there, untouched. The street was silent. I felt a chill on my neck and looked around. The road was empty in both directions. No cars parked. No windows lit up. Just my motorbike engine clicking softly as it cooled in the cold air. I shook my head and climbed onto the seat. As I started the engine again, I looked back at the building one more time. The light was still on inside. Something about it felt wrong. I couldn't explain why. I forced myself to look away and turned the bike around. I drove back the way I came. The streetlights felt even further apart now. I tried not to focus on the dark spaces between them. My chest felt tight with unease. I told myself I was just tired, that I hadn't eaten enough today, that I was overthinking. Halfway down the road, I passed a small empty parking lot beside an old warehouse. I noticed a large white van parked at the edge. Its side was facing me, and all the windows were covered with some sort of reflective sun shield, even though it was night. The van's headlights were off, but as I drove past it, I saw the faint red glow of its brake lights. It wasn't parked. The engine was running. I kept driving, trying not to look obvious. My mirror showed the van pulling out from the parking spot. It turned onto the road behind me, keeping a distance. My hands felt sweaty on the handlebars. I tried to breathe calmly. Maybe they were just leaving at the same time as me. It was just coincidence. I drove faster, telling myself I was being paranoid. The van kept pace behind me. I changed lanes, and it changed lanes too. I slowed down. It slowed down. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sped up, weaving between the faded lane markings, and the van sped up too, closing the distance. I was coming up on an intersection with a traffic light. It was red. There were no other cars. I ran the light without thinking, almost skidding as I turned sharply onto a side street. I didn't know the area well. The street was narrow, lined with small shuttered shops and metal security gates. I glanced back. The van had turned too. Its headlights washed over the cracked buildings as it followed me. I felt like throwing up. My vision blurred with panic. I drove faster, engine screaming, trying to remember the map in my head. The street ended in a T-junction. I turned left, then right, then left again, making random turns through the dark, silent neighborhood, hoping to lose them. But the van kept appearing behind me. It was always there, no matter how many turns I took. Its headlights were blinding when I glanced back. I couldn't see the driver. The windows were tinted too dark. I saw a narrow alleyway between two buildings. It was barely wide enough for my motorbike. Without thinking, I swerved into it. My handlebars scraped against a brick wall, sparks flying. I forced the bike forward, scraping along the rough bricks, until I reached the end of the alley. It opened into a small courtyard with garbage bins and piles of broken wooden pallets. I turned off the engine and jumped off, dragging the motorbike behind one of the big metal bins. I crouched down, trying to control my breathing. My chest burned. My legs were shaking so hard I thought I might fall over. I heard the van's engine outside the alley. It stopped. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking into the alley. The sound of boots scuffing against concrete. I pressed myself against the cold metal bin, squeezing my eyes shut. The footsteps came closer, then stopped. I heard breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. It sounded like they were standing just a few feet away. I didn't dare move. I barely even breathed. There was silence for a long time. Then the footsteps moved again, back towards the road. I heard the van's engine start up, then fade away into the distance. I stayed crouched there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. My knees hurt from the cold ground. My fingers felt numb. Eventually, I forced myself to stand up. My entire body was trembling. I wheeled the motorbike out of the alley as quietly as I could. The streets were empty again. I didn't see the van anywhere. I got back on and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I drove home as fast as I could, taking wide main roads with traffic and lights and people. When I finally reached my apartment building, I parked the bike in the locked cage and ran inside. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, unlocked my door with fumbling fingers, and slammed it shut behind me. I locked both bolts and slid the chain across. I stood there in the dark room, listening. My ears rang with leftover fear. I couldn't hear anything outside. No van, no footsteps. I went to the window and peeked through the curtain. The street was empty except for a couple parked cars. I kept watching for a long time, but nothing moved out there. Eventually, I sank down onto the floor, hugging my knees to my chest. My throat felt tight. I stayed like that for hours, until the sky outside turned pale with dawn. I didn't go to work the next day. I didn't even call in sick. I just lay on the mattress staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed with missed calls and messages, but I ignored them. I kept thinking about the van, about the footsteps, about what might have happened if I hadn't hidden in that alley. Later that day, I finally ate something. Cold leftover rice from the fridge. My hands were still shaking as I lifted the spoon. I couldn't stop thinking about how quiet the footsteps were, how calm the breathing sounded, like they weren't even worried about being caught, like it was normal for them to follow someone down dark streets late at night. After that night, I quit the delivery job. I couldn't bring myself to drive around those streets again, knowing that van might still be out there. I found a small cleaning job instead, early mornings only. Less money, but I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep without waking up in a cold sweat. Sometimes even now, when I walk home late from the bus stop, I hear a faint engine behind me. Or I see a van parked by the curb with its windows covered. I know it's probably just another delivery van, just another parked car. But every time,